Here we are.
Hi all.
Hi all.
Hi all.
Not so jovial?
No, I'm not so jovial. I have a lot of anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety. And I don't normally feel like that, but I do. I have a lot of anxiety about this. This is very difficult for me. So, and there's also a strong likelihood that there's people that won't speak to me after this. So it's just this, it is what it is.
I always feel like somebody's watching me.
Please don't mock this. This is serious. So, okay. So I wanted to come on before our guests come on and talk a little bit about why I'm doing this, why now, like what's really going on. So for the past 10 years, I have been really undergoing huge transformation in a lot of ways, but this very specific way. And so I want to preface that with, I was born in North Miami Beach, second generation Jewish South Floridian. By definition, we were Zionists. Like that wasn't really, it almost wasn't presented. It was like as much of an option as whether or not I was going to go to college, was whether or not we were going to support Israel. Like it was just a given. And I actually love Israel. I have been to Israel, and actually I brought something that I wanted to show you guys because this is actually how personal this gets for me. So this, can you guys see?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a shirt that I have from when I was in Israel. It's an Israeli army shirt. It was considered contraband for me to even bring it back. I actually traded a Walkman for it. I mean, granted, this was in '87, so you know it was a thing. But the man who I got this shirt from was like one of the kindest, gentlest, most beautiful people. His name was Ofer. I, for the life of me, would never remember his last name, and he was a kid like me. But anyway, so this is someone who was a friend, you know, and I just, this is very hard. This is very hard. So for me, when I want to talk about looking at Israel in any sort of negative way, it's very difficult. There's been a cognitive dissonance for years, and I finally just couldn't keep doing the mental gymnastics around what's going on. And I've learned new facts. And so it's very important for me on this issue because I feel like, especially with a lot of my Jewish peers, that we were really misinformed. Some of it purposeful, some of it just inadvertent. You know, like I don't think my grandparents purposely lied, but do I think that there were nefarious propagandists that were lying to them? Yeah. So my perspective is now obviously different. And so coming to this point has not been easy. And I've been here for a while, and I'm somewhat shamed to say that I just still wasn't willing to be public about it, not just for political ramifications, although that is a thing. And this very well could be the hill that I politically die on. And if that's the case, that's the case. So that's something to me that I have to do for me. I've always wondered my whole life if I was alive during slavery, during segregation, during, you know, the times when it was a minority opinion speaking out against something that was an injustice, would I have done that? And I always thought, yeah, of course I would. And really, I haven't, not enough. So that's where I am now with this. And I've done a lot of research. And by the time, I would say, by this time next year, you can count on me to probably be one of the most educated people. And that's just the way I am. Like I'll go down rabbit holes. Like I will be the most educated person on this. But my fellow Jewish people, we have been misinformed. We weren't taught accurate history. We just weren't. We were taught Zionist talking points. And we were taught there was a land with no people for a people with no land. We've constantly conflated Judaism and Zionism. We have this thought that somehow there's a connection between post-Holocaust and the state of Israel in terms of that's why it's there. That's where consent was hugely gained. But that plan was in play a long time before. And it really had nothing to do with the Holocaust as to why this started. But we're going to get into all that. But I just think it's very important that when people say, do you think Israel has a right to exist? I actually don't believe any country has a right to exist. I think people have rights and countries have obligations. So no, I don't think any country has the right to exist. And I've also come to accept this very basic fact, and I am begging people to understand this. You cannot have an ethnocracy and a democracy. You cannot have an ethno-state without conducting an ethno-cleanse. Those things cannot happen. And I just, people need to really understand that this is not just my opinion. And this is just the way it is. There's certain things that to me are just oxymorons, and that's one of it. So either you support an ethnocracy, and that's fine when we know all the facts and you hear what really happened and what's really going on and 2 levels of citizenship, and you know all the information, and you say, you know what, it's still more important to me for the Jews to have a national homeland that is a national Jewish state. Okay, but you cannot claim it's a democracy. You have to accept that you are supporting an ethnocracy, which is really no different than a theocracy. And it's just something that we've grown to accept regarding the state of Israel. And it is very scary as a Jewish person to think like what would happen to Jews if it weren't for Israel, because I've been programmed to think that. And anti-Semitism is very real, very real. And so the thought of what would happen to Jews if there's no Israel, like what does that mean for us? It is very scary. Like the threat is not unreasonable. It's not irrational. Like fear is very rational for Jewish people in this. It's not like a made up thing, but it doesn't justify what we're doing to an entire other group of people. So that's just where I am. But there's no logical conclusion between what we're doing is actually what's making us safer. I would argue it's making us less safe. And it is definitely increasing levels of actual anti-Semitism, not just people that support BDS or people that dare to speak out about, human rights injustice, but real anti-Semitism is a thing. So I think that when we throw that term around loosely, it doesn't serve us. And I'm just tired of that. I'm tired of people like my representative not understanding what nuance is, what real history is. Why is one group of people entitled by right to a piece of land? And the higher question is, where do we get our rights? See, as humans, we get rights by our nation states grant us rights. So basically, we as humans come together in the United States and we create a constitution, which is the authority. That authority is what gives us rights. So what, let's say, gives a country a right to exist? Where is that right from? So if the state of Israel has a right to exist, under what authority is that right? Because rights are granted by a higher source. That's what rights are. They're not innate. So otherwise we wouldn't even need to call them rights. We would all just go about our lives and do whatever we want. So when you say something has a right, I'm curious, what is the authority? And regarding the state of Israel, the only thing I could think of would be international law, except for that Israel is in violation of international law to a level that is just off the charts. And somehow we just keep excusing it. So if you're going to claim a right by an authority, you'd probably need to also follow that authority. But anyway, I don't think that any countries have rights to exist. They exist at the pleasure of their citizenry, and certainly a country that claims to be a democracy. So that is my whole intro spiel. I feel like I rambled, and we're going to get started. We're still waiting on one more person, and that's about it. That was my spiel. How was that?
I think it's similar to, in many ways, I think the issue with anti-Semitism in the United States, which was on full display the other day with lunatic Kanye West.
Now, it does very much appear to be anti-Semitic to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I'm not, yeah, not hyperbolically. Like he really does.
And he's also dog whistling to a portion of the population that is equally as anti-Semitic. But one of the reasons why anti-Semitism is what I would consider to becoming a hot button issue of this moment and continues to grow and grow is very similar to a lot of issues that we face in the economic structure that we see in our country today. If you paid people enough to live, there wouldn't be a welfare state and the country would be happy. But instead, because corporations get to make the rules and no one ever stands up to them the way that they should, we find ourselves in this what is considered to be this sort of convoluted puzzle about how do we actually solve the problem. Truth is, you don't really know how to solve the problem other than making it worse by assuming that, well, if somebody's anti-Semitic, then they must be shamed. Or instead of asking the question, well, why is somebody anti-Semitic? Well, when a particular population calls themselves the chosen people, there is naturally going to be a reaction from other people who will say, that's ridiculous and I don't agree. And we have over 4,000 religions on this planet. Odds are the one you believe in ain't right. Probably none of them are right. But people are going to believe what they're going to believe. And anti-Semitism is very real because our ruling class makes it so that the hatred just continues to be brought down holy hell on people. So when I say that the treatment of the Palestinian people is probably as a direct correlator in this time to the anti-Semitism we feel here today, especially here in the United States, that is a correlated effect. And there are people who are just in total denial of that and don't want to admit that it plays a role. Now, if we were to address that, perhaps there would be a different approach and a different opinion as such. So
I think we should just start. I think that's fine. And I just emailed the rabbi and I'm waiting to hear back. But in the meantime, let's start.
Okay, so let's bring in our first guest, and hopefully our second guest will join shortly thereafter. Professor Doug Russinow is an author and professor of history at Metro State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Twin cities are lovely. His publications include The Politics of Authenticity, Liberalism, Christianity, and the New Left in America, from 1998, Visions of Progress, The Liberal Tradition in America in 2007, and then finally, the one that I
know now he's gonna need to have him come back on just for that.
The Reagan Era, A History of the 1980s, written in 2015. And what a time that book could have come out, because that is really the inflection point of where politics really changed in America and are continuing to change every day. Doug Russinow, welcome to Generational Change.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Good day to both of you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. And do you pronounce your last name is Russinow, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Did I say Russinow?
Yes, you did.
Sorry. Okay.
Well, there's a family history there. There were people there who said it, Russinow, but not for a long time.
Interesting. So I'm thankful that you can come. I did see when I was looking for people to invite to talk about this and I want to make sure that the website is current, but it was talking that you are currently researching history of Zionism.
Yes, that's right. And specifically Zionism in the United States after 1948. And, I'm an historian of the United States. I'm an American historian. Zionism, as you know, is an international movement, has been always. So the American branch of that movement, I think, should be understood as part of this larger global movement. But it also, of course, in the United States, was very much shaped by the specific conditions and traditions and experiences of American Jews. And so, yes, I have been doing a lot of research on this in recent years.
Yeah, it's really all very interesting to me because I think that there is this huge disconnect between the actual history of Zionism and the propaganda that has been consistently put out by that movement. And so I know that you focus on this country, but talk a little bit about where did Zionism started? I mean, I know we're talking about Austria, late 1800s, something like that. And there's definitely a component where it was definitely based on rising anti-Semitism, but it certainly wasn't a 20th century situation. So would you just talk a little bit about where this came from and why?
Sure. And of course, I can preface this, Jen, by responding to what you say about propaganda or whatever term you wish to use. In Israel, my Hebrew is lousy, but in Israel, always there has been a term, hasbara, Hebrew term, that basically refers to propaganda or communications on behalf of the state of Israel. And in Israel, that's a very explicit discussion, and it always has been. In other words, people in Israel have always said that Israeli Jews, but also Jews outside of Israel, in the United States and elsewhere, ought to and have an obligation to engage in hasbara and may participate in hasbara on behalf of Israel. So, in a certain way, the efforts to engage in, whether you wish to call it propaganda or public diplomacy or communications, very explicit, very open. Now, one point of somewhat contested communication is the idea that some people in the Zionist movement have always expressed, which is that Zionism is not a new modern phenomenon, but rather it's always been inherent in Jewish religion, because Jews at their Passover Seder will say next year in Jerusalem, and there's always been a tradition of Messianic Judaism that hopes for the restoration of what, the Bible stories tell us was an ancient Judaic kingdom in Eretz Yisrael, or historic Palestine. And so some people in the Zionist movement have always said, well, this is just part of Judaism, the hope for the formation, or as they would put it, the restoration of a Jewish kingdom or a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael. But as a matter of historical fact, you're correct that the Zionist movement arose in the late 19th century in Europe. It started in Central Europe, just as you say, although it first gained a real mass base further east in Eastern Europe, where the Jewish population of Europe was concentrated in the Russian Pale of Settlement, what's now Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Western Russia. That was the heartland of European Jewry, and the conditions that they lived on were highly discriminatory in all kinds of ways. So there was very strong sentiment in favor of Zionism in Eastern Europe. But the movement is often dated from the 1890s forward, started by the Hungarian Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl. Some people look to precursors before that in the late 19th century, but what we think of as the political Zionist movement that aimed at acquiring land that Jews would own in what was then Ottoman Palestine, and what later on, after World War I, became British ruled Palestine, with an eye toward eventually forming some coherent sovereign Jewish area. This really began in the 1890s, and it was not in any way universally embraced by Jews, far from that, anywhere, but certainly including the United States. And for some time, for decades in the United States, I would say up until the 1930s, Zionism was probably a minority tendency within American Jewry, although, as in Europe, in the United States, the strongest Zionists tended to be Jews who had come from Eastern Europe, from the Pale of Settlement. They brought Zionism with them. And the strength of Zionism within American Jewish life grew and grew, and it became markedly stronger, starting in the 1930s with the discrimination against and the oppression of German Jews. And I think a lot of people understand the basic outlines of the story. After that, I think there's a difference between the early Zionist activists who were really ideologues, who believed that anti-Semitism was such a horrible problem in the world in general that the Jews needed a state of their own. That's the only way they could be safe, and really the only way they could live fully as Jews. They would suffer discrimination and oppression and danger anywhere else. Those were the real ideologues. Later on, starting in the 1930s, I think a more popular basis for Zionism, even among Jews, but certainly then among non-Jews, or at least support for Zionism among non-Jews in the United States, was the idea that that there were existential dangers facing Jews in certain parts of the world, and they needed a refuge.
Okay, so I see when we're talking about the distinction, like, of that biblical sense of Zion, like next year in Zion, like we'll all be together. But to me, that isn't something that I would ever read literally, like anything else. I wouldn't necessarily read literally. And I would think of it in terms of, in a way, saying next year when we're all safe, next year when we can be somewhere where we're all able to be how we want to be. And it isn't referencing geopolitical sovereignty over a group of people. Like, it's a completely different thing. And so when people that I think are being very, political Zionists reference things that are biblical, to me, that's just silliness, because that really not have anything to do with what their agenda is. And then the other problem is all of that was happening in the 30s. And that is where there was serious propaganda, because they knew that if people knew there were people there, it wouldn't be so easy to just create a Jewish state. So the propaganda was a land with no people for a people with no land. And everyone just thought that it was just this empty space that was just sitting there. And since the Jews were always entitled to be there, we could just now make a Jewish state there. And it made that much sense. And it's because the fear of what will happen is very rational. Like, that part of the equation is, to me, very rational. I just don't see the logical connection to maintenance of a Jewish state politically to protecting Jews globally.
Yeah, well, there are a number of points to pick up on what you say. You're first of all, I agree that it's highly dangerous in general for people in the modern world to base contemporary political claims on ancient sacred books. Generally, not something I would support or recommend. But that's my modern point of view. And I agree that the incantation or the prayer, next year in Jerusalem, the Passover Haggadah, that I think lots of Jews are familiar with, I think for a long, long time was understood very much as just a symbolic statement of yearning for a sense of maybe this worldly salvation, rather than literally a messianic hope for the restoration of some ancient kingdom, given by God. And one major branch of American Jewish religion, the Reform movement, in the late 19th century, actually thought it was important to state explicitly, as they did, that they did not favor the restoration of the ancient kingdom of King David, or the revival of any ancient Bible customs. And so they were very explicit. They were explicitly anti-Zionist, and they eventually changed, right? But that was a major branch of American Judaism. And so there was a real struggle for many decades within organized American Jewish life, meaning religious life, about whether reform in particular should move away from their original very strongly anti-Zionist position. And eventually they did. They got on the train. Now, as for this understanding that Palestine was empty, right? And I remember, believe me, I heard the same thing when I was a kid. I tell you lots of stories. And I tend to think of Jewish Zionism as a series of concentric circles. There are people in the outer edges who have just a sort of a dim awareness of things. And then there are people who are more and more involved and who understand a lot more, and who understand and who, have a more detailed way of thinking about things, very, very committed to this movement and its goals. I think at the popular level, there were plenty of people who thought of the land of Israel as not being used or very inhabited. Maybe there were some people there, but pretty thin on the ground. And that maybe the people who lived there were nomadic, didn't really have settled towns, villages, cities. None of that was true. There were Bedouins in what became southern Israel, the Negev desert, but the Palestinian Arab population certainly lived in villages, towns, and cities, practiced agriculture and all kinds of other economic activities. Most Jews, certainly in the United States, even 50 years ago, and not even to speak of 100 years ago, really knew very little about this, didn't know anything about it. I think people who were very involved in buying land and settling Jews in Palestine before 1948 and in Israel after that understood very differently. I think people who were very involved knew very well that there was an existing Palestinian Arab population. Now, I think that the phrase you mentioned, a land without people for a people without land, when that was originally used, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was actually slightly different. The phrase was a land without a people for a people without a land. In other words, I mean, it seems like a small difference, but the idea was that, well, maybe there are people there, but they're not truly a people, meaning a nation. I think the tendency in Britain, in the United States, in Europe generally, was to view the Palestinian Arabs as, first of all, not a distinct nation, whether, or an ethnic group, but rather as just one part of a broader Arab movement. And also as backward, undeveloped, there were real colonialist attitudes that Europeans in general, including Jews and white people in the United States, had about the Arab world, such that it could be seen as positive for Europeans or Americans to move to a place like Palestine and take the land and develop it. This was very much the mindset, not only of people who were Zionists, but of others who were not Jewish but supported the Zionist movement. They saw it as a way of helping to modernize that part of the world. All of this is wrapped up in and expressed in the idea that it was a land without a nation. There was a time when Zionism was easily defined by most people as Jewish nationalism. And people don't that easily use that term today. The term nationalism has acquired negative associations, I think, for a lot of people. But in the logic of nationalism, which is what Zionism was, it was a late developing European nationalist movement on the part of a scattered group of people. In the logic of nationalism, nations had rights to live, to develop, and to be free collectively. And Zionists believed that Jews were a nation and they had a right to a land. And when they said that Palestine was a land without a people, what they were saying was that, well, there's some people there, not that many, they're not very advanced, but most important, they don't constitute a nation. Therefore, they don't have the same claim to the land that the Jews, as a long-established national group, do. And this might seem a strange way of thinking about things today, but this was very much the logic of nationalism, which was not invented by a Jewish Zionist. It was pervasive at the time the Zionist movement took shape.
Yeah. Well, it's really no different than what we did to the indigenous people on this continent. It's the same thing. There were people here, they were doing fine without us. But we needed to we were helping them. We were civilizing them. And then it's a matter of, well, they don't have legal papers to show that they own this property. So they're not a legitimate nation. They're not a real people. And we were taught that they were just sort of, and they didn't use the term savages, but they people were very backwards, that they didn't know how to feed themselves, that they I was taught in my lifetime that if not for the Jews becoming Israel becoming a Jewish state, that they would have just stayed in the dark ages there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I mean, you make the analogy to Native Americans and the way in which their land was taken through a Euro-American settlement and warfare, of course. And there are many people who work in higher education and in the academic world today who also make this comparison, which is considered, how should I put it? It's controversial in some quarters, considered incendiary to kind of liken or analogize Zionism in historic Palestine with the settler colonialism of Europeans and Americans in North America and in the Americas generally. But this concept or this category of settler colonialism is one that's been embraced by a lot of academic critics and some activists, even at a popular level, critics of Zionism and of the State of Israel. And again, this is considered, I think, offensive by many Zionists, but it's one that is pretty widely embraced, not only by people who are overtly pro-Palestine and pro-Palestinian, but also by academic scholars on a broad basis. And of course, there are differences in each case, but there is a general phenomenon uh, of settler colonialism that involved, uh, transferring large numbers of people, or people transferring themselves across long distances and dispossessing an indigenous population. And that's a long conversation in
Right.
itself. It's somewhat academic, but I think you see it seep into um, activist um, environments as well. I think if you were to read um, a lot of the texts that are linked with the Black Lives Matter movement, pardon me, you would see references to settler colonialism and linkages made between Palestine and the United States historically, as well as other societies and countries like Australia or South Africa, perhaps most controversially, New Zealand and other places.
Yeah, I think that where the disconnect is that the people in, let's say, certain circles that are finding that know these are facts. There were people there. There was a Nakba that we celebrate on May 14th as some great Independence Day for Israel, which is considered a catastrophe to the 750,000 people whose lives were ruined. We were never taught that. And then there's this huge disconnect between actual facts and even people that we have that are our representatives. Like, we see it politically here, it's really a problem. You have representatives calling people out as anti-Semitic and throwing that around left and right. These people were never even taught that there was a Nakba. So we have people in charge of policy that are throwing out labels of anti-Semitism, and they really have no idea what they're talking about whatsoever.
Well, for some people, that's true. I was certainly never taught about the Nakba either. It's something I learned about later on. And there was a kind of a folk or a popular sort of narrative that was substituted instead, which was that there weren't a lot of Arabs there. The ones who were there were not doing very much with the land. And they were asked to stay, but they wanted to leave.
Right, they wanted to
leave. Was created. And this is often something you heard. I'll tell you a little story about this.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I remember watching the old movie Exodus on TV with my father, and that was adapted from an unbelievably successful book, which was a work of fiction by Leon Uris, and I think it was published in 1958. And believe me, that novel Exodus, that was the basis for most Americans' understanding of Israel and its history, whether they were Jews or Christians. I mean, it was an unbelievably important book in spreading certain narratives. And in the movie version, Lee J. Cobb, he's this Zionist elder statesman. And at the end of the movie, when the war comes and the Arabs are leaving, he gets up behind a microphone on a platform, and he says to the Arabs, stay with us. Please build the nation with us. I remember watching this with my dad on TV. My dad was a total Zionist. I grew up in a Jewish household, and it was just as you said earlier in your introduction. It went without saying, you were totally pro-Israel. I remember even so watching it with my dad, and when the Lee J. Cobb, the actor, says this, my dad said, "Well, that's not true. The Israelis didn't say please stay." So right. And this was not, my dad was not somebody who'd studied this in depth, but I think that to some extent people had no idea and they didn't know a lot about these things. But to some extent, also, people in the Jewish community understood that another people had been displaced, and some of the talking points were said with kind of a wink and a nod, at least at times. I do think that there was a strong attitude that, look, Jews have been pushed around for centuries, and they got a right to do some of their own pushing now. And I don't need to know the details. But it's also true that most Jews really, until pretty recently, never learned about this. And there's a group called If Not Now, I think, that runs a project called You Never Told Us, which expresses this very powerfully. I think the situation is different now, in the sense that most people don't, you've got to be in a pretty cloistered environment not to know that there are people called Palestinians and they have their own narrative, I think. And I've seen some people shift pretty deftly, pretty quickly, from saying, I don't know about that, that's wrong, to saying, oh, sure, everybody knows about that, we don't need to talk about I've experienced that, and so I think if you talk to Palestinian Americans, if you talk to Arab Americans in general, American Muslims, and by the way, I think it's important that American Jews, take whatever opportunities they have to do that. They'll hear, of course, another perspective, and I think that's important.
We're speaking with Professor Doug Rossinow. I can't help myself. Of Metro State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Big football game for you two tomorrow, by the way.
It always comes out to
the Vikings and the Dolphins.
I mean, well, if we can, let's say we could all agree on a shared sense of history, okay? Then how do we get people to understand that the concept of a two-state solution is not a thing? Like that's not a possible thing now. Like we're past that at this point.
Well, that might be true. People who have always, well, first of all, back up a little bit, do some of the history. American Jews in general didn't favor a two-state solution until the 1980s. They were always against, people who supported the state of Israel had a lot of reasons why Israel should not relinquish the territory that it had conquered in 1967 in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai, which they did give back to Egypt through negotiations in the late 1970s. The basis for a two-state solution would be Israel giving up most or all of the territory it conquered in 1967. And it was only after the first Intifada, 1987-88, that a lot of American Jews who were Zionists but who were also liberal started to say, two-state solution, that's what we need. And that really became the liberal Zionist position then in the late 80s after the first Intifada. Details need to be worked out, but basically that's the goal. And that became the official view of the United States government after that across several presidential administrations of both parties. And there was the Oslo Peace Accords, which then ran aground in the 1990s, which is a long story in itself. But throughout this entire period, from the 80s onward, the state of Israel was settling more and more Jews on the West Bank in East Jerusalem, particularly, which over time, if you look back to the 70s and 80s, it's amazing how small the number of Jewish settlers were compared to what they are today, and how much more possible it might seem it would have been back then.
Yeah.
To have actually made a two-state solution work. It's very hard for a lot of people today to see how that could work, which has led people, at least who are very progressive, to start thinking about whether there's a way eventually for a one-state solution to work, which was always something that Zionists were totally against, and supporters of Israel were totally against, and Muslims still are. They say that's impossible. That would be the end of Jews in Israel, and it would be the end of, it would be extremely dangerous, and it would be the end of any kind of a Jewish state. But now it's hard to see how any solution is really that feasible or promising. So I think eventually people are going to have to come to new ways of thinking about this. If people think it's possible to still make a two-state solution work, then I think the burden is on them to show how that's possible, and how they're willing to support the things that are necessary to make that happen. In general, I think liberal Zionists have had this two-state solution position since the late 80s. And I do think it was meaningful in the late 80s for liberal Zionists in this country to say, well, we now recognize Palestinian peoplehood, which they'd never done before, most of them. And to say, okay, well, there should be two states for two peoples. But, that was a meaningful thing to do 35 years ago, or a meaningful thing to say. A lot has changed on the ground. Many more hundreds of thousands of Jewish settlers in the West Bank. And is it possible now, or does there have to be a new way in the future? I don't think this will be resolved easily or quickly. I think there's a long struggle ahead, and it'll be painful for a lot of people. There's no way around that.
What do you equate a lot of the anti-Semitism that you're seeing today? Because obviously everything is, it's somewhat familiar as generations go on, but I'd like to think that there are certain correlations between the behavior of the Israeli government and the backlash that we have seen, not just there, but also here in the States. I think that there is something to be said for that. How do you see it as it currently stands?
Are you asking about anti-Semitism
Yes.
in the United States, where it comes from?
Yeah, where you would say it's are there any trigger points you would say that are making it become more ramped up? Is it the behavior towards the Palestinian people as
Oh, I see.
one end
I
of
see.
it, or do you
Well,
see?
I think maybe I understand what you're asking. I think the resurgence and the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States and elsewhere in Europe, for example, it's very real, unfortunately, um, alarmingly. Does the behavior of Israel toward the Palestinians help to fuel the rise of anti-Semitism? I think perhaps it can. I think that increased anti-Semitism probably has other sources, independent sources, but uh, it seems hopelessly entangled with people's feelings for and against Israel, about Israel, and the Palestinians. Right-wing anti-Semites in the United States, like the kind you saw march in Charlottesville uh, some years ago, chanting "Jews will not replace us," because they support the so-called Great Replacement theory, or believe in it, I should say. Um, they're not motivated by solidarity with the Palestinians. Right? As a matter of fact, what they're arguing is that Jews in the United States somehow have masterminded immigration in general to the United States that threatens the cultural fabric of this country. And that threatening immigration would probably include Muslim immigration. So, you know, right-wing anti-Semites, I don't think, are motivated by concern over the rights of the Palestinians. There are people on the left who are so angry about Israel's treatment of the Palestinians that they sometimes speak with a good deal of venom about Israel. And many Jews, including those who are progressive, are taken aback, I think, by the feeling of antagonism that they experience, especially if they're still attached to the state of Israel. And there are people, whether it's in the Arab world, in the Middle East, in Europe, or in the United States, who see the great success of the state of Israel in getting its way um, with regard to the Palestinians, and also regarding extensive support from the U.S. government, who interpret that success of the state of Israel politically as the product of some special, even somewhat demonic power that Jews have internationally. So there are ways in which antagonism toward Israel and solidarity with Palestinians can take on an anti-Semitic form and fuel those, that kind of poison. But I think it's very important for people who are concerned about anti-Semitism, and particularly if they support the state of Israel, to really be careful and not indulge in the sort of easy out of saying criticism of Israel, or even outright anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitic. But at a kind of emotional level, these things get entangled. I mean, Jen, I think we're first and foremost interested in separating Jewishness and Judaism from Zionism,
Yeah.
and they are different things. Zionism is an ideology. It's an international project that's existed over the last 100 years. Judaism obviously is a religion, goes back much longer. Jewishness is an identity that combines ethnic and religious elements. These things are all in different categories. They're not the same things. But they have links to one another, of course, very close links to one another when you see them. I mean, Zionism, when it exists, of course, is very closely related to Jewishness. But at an emotional level, it's important to understand how these things can get entangled in the minds and the hearts of people who are Jewish and hear criticism of the state of Israel, but also sometimes in the minds of people who are very angry about the things that they see Israel doing.
On both.
Yeah. And then you find yourself in a very unique situation because your congresswoman basically takes the brunt of a lot of the, you want to say, anti-Muslim hatred in this country. She wears a hijab, which only adds to the ramped up anger towards, the fact that she is I mean, listen, of all the members of the so-called squad, I mean, Representative Omar gets more done on Capitol Hill than anybody else does. her record speaks for itself. And again, I don't agree with everything that she says,
but we don't think she's an anti-Semite. And I know that there are people that accuse her, such as our representative, has accused her of being anti-Semitic.
How do you see Representative Omar as a representative, not just of the Twin Cities, but as somebody who has spoken out against, or basically has tried to be as politically correct as possible, distinguishing between Zionism and Judaism?
Right. Well, I don't see her as an anti-Semite. I don't. I mean, she said things about the influence of the Israel lobby on Capitol Hill, which get a lot of people pissed off. But the existence of the Israel lobby, and it's a formidable lobby. It's not really a secret, even though people in public might think it's still good politics to be angry when anybody says that it exists. I think Representative Omar sometimes has spoken somewhat flippantly, and I think that's been unfortunate because she is somebody who's vulnerable to serious criticism and political attack on this basis. So I think it's probably in her interest to speak carefully. She made a comment about it's all about the Benjamins, the influence of Israel on Capitol Hill. I don't think it's that simple, and that's although I think campaign donations are very, very important, but there's also a lot of genuine and sincere support for Israel in the American population generally, as well as among people who are involved in politics. But nonetheless, it's been very important for somebody like Representative Omar to be in the Congress, willing to speak on behalf of the Palestinians and what they experience, and to raise critical questions about the forms and extent of U.S. support for the state of Israel. She's not the only one who's done so. The U.S. representative for St. Paul, next door to Minneapolis, Betty McCollum, has been quite outspoken, not as public, perhaps, not as high profile, but has done a lot of work and is quite concerned about the treatment of Palestinians, and has been a very important voice on Capitol Hill, and there are others. But the idea that the state of Israel can just have anything it wants from Congress has been a problem, I think, for a long time. Congress alone does not make U.S. foreign policy, but it plays an important role. And for people to raise critical questions, if they're progressives, about those kind of international relationships and about any country getting a blank check from the U.S. People who represent U.S. taxpayers, regardless of what they do to the Palestinians, I think that is an important thing for progressives to support. And increasingly, I think they do support it.
I think so. I mean, we definitely see it more on the left. It still is not trickled up to the more, centrist people. And that's what I'm trying to do, is like teach people, there's a whole story that you were never taught. And what's very frustrating is that no matter what avenue people choose to protest. So obviously BDS is, a very huge nonviolent movement, and people don't realize that it comes from Palestinians. It's their movement that other people are supporting. But we get this whataboutism, right? Like, well, but so-and-so does this, and well, what about Saudi Arabia? And I'm like, yeah, I'm against that too. But none of those places, interestingly, claim to be the best. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. So my thing is whether or not you might agree with a nation state, a Jewish state, or not, but you cannot have your own facts, right? So you can't then say that it functions as a democracy when it functions as an apartheid state. So I want to put out there like that. One, there is a lot of nonviolent resistance that is going on. People on the pro-Zionist side tend to say, oh, the Arabs are always trying to kill us and they're building tunnels to come and kill us and all this stuff. And nobody recognizes that, no, there's nonviolent action. And then the people that want to participate in that nonviolent action get labeled anti-Semitic.
Well, that's right. And there's a great deal of nonviolent activism, you're right, in Palestine and on the part of people who are in solidarity with the Palestinians. And many times I've heard people say, well, if only the Palestinians would embrace nonviolence, then
Right.
they'd make more headway. Well, a lot of them do and have, and people don't hear about it enough.
Kind of love that corporate media.
I mean, and you have to go to peacemakers.org or other places to find information about this. Many of the Christian churches actually have been very involved with this. Most of all, the Quakers, this issue for a long time, and I think there's some Jews who are rubbed the wrong way by the idea that Christians are going to talk to Jews about what the Jewish state is doing wrong, given the history of Christian anti-Semitism. But the fact is, they have been active with very much nonviolent protest and solidarity activities. So I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
Professor, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast
And
today.
I have no idea what happened to Rabbi Rosen. Like, he was supposed to, I had so many notes, like copious notes.
You're going to have to do your own show with him, considering how much notes you took.
Oh, I have copious notes.
Yeah, that's going to be a
like
podcast on its own. But yeah, listen, you know what? It's
Have
Saturday.
you read this, Doug?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, it's really good because this is the kind of thing that unfortunately a lot of the older people need, is to have their hand held by a rabbi who sort of went through this awareness and reckoning, and have it explained that it's normal to feel bad about this, but that doesn't mean we should ignore it. But
we've already gotten multiple emails from people who couldn't make it today saying, we're sorry, we'll definitely be back another time.
So this needs to be a series instead of an event, is what I think I'm turning this into. It'll just be like an ongoing series.
Professor, how can people reach you if they want to check out your work? If there's anything in particular, they may have a question.
What's the most recent book? What are you have anything you're plugging?
Well, he did write a book about me a few years ago.
He's got to go there.
I definitely saw America in the greatest way possible. But even though I won the greatest electoral landslide in our nation's history, I somehow was not able to convince Minnesota to vote for me. So I did the best I could, and it didn't work.
Well, anybody who's Gen X, like I am, remembers the 80s really well. Really has really vivid memories of it. So yeah, I did write the book on Reagan, the Reagan era, and since then I've been working on this project, my university email is pretty easy to find. Happy to field questions from people if they arise. I'll just make one further comment if I can before we close. Jen, you talked about people saying what aboutism. And so what about Saudi Arabia? And you're saying, well, you don't support Saudi Arabia. You're not enthusiastic about Saudi Arabia. I really think that the idea of, this is a problem for liberals and progressives. The idea of supporting an ethno-state. I don't think that's necessarily a problem for someone on the right, for a conservative, right? But it's a problem for liberals, because in general, they don't celebrate ethno-states. There's one that some of them celebrate, and it's an exception, I think, that a lot of liberals make, and that's something to reflect on.
Absolutely.
Professor, thank you so much. Let's continue the conversation.
Would you come back and talk about other stuff sometime?
Sure, of course. I'm always happy to talk about history.
Okay. No, that's great. No, he's going to want to talk to you about Reagan in the 80s, because he was born in the 80s. He's not like us. We're Gen X. We know.
Yeah.
I was born in
I will talk about the 80s anytime.
No, I was born in '83, but I do have vivid memories of Reagan when I was young. He really stood out. He was a cultural icon. There's just no getting around that. Right? When you think about the '80s, you think about Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, things like that. But you also think about
big
Reagan.
Hair. I had some big hair.
Listen, I'm somewhat jealous of my colleague here who happened to see Springsteen at the Orange Bowl during the Born in the USA, tour. But yeah, there's a lot of things that were great about the 80s, but there's a lot of things that we can't ignore. That the 80s was basically the start of how we got to where we got today.
We'll address this at another point. But thank you for being so professorial. That's exactly what we need.
Yeah, well, that's what I do. But thank you for having me. As always, it's very nice talking with you.
Thank you, Doug. Nice to meet you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
So interestingly enough,
I think we figured out what our problem was.
I think we figured out what our problem is with the rabbi, is that, and this is on me, that I do look back and he was questioning what time zone, because both Professor Rossinow, and here we go. Oh, wait, no. Oh, that's Katie. So,
No, when I sent him the email this morning, though, I specifically indicated that it was Eastern Standard Time, but he may not have acknowledged. Again, it's what it is. I mean, Central Time people.
So we very well might now have Rabbi Rosen coming in and also being, if he comes back, like he popped in for a minute and then I thought, oh my God, he thought we were Central Time. So then which is fine, but then he left again. So I don't know, but I really want to talk to him about this. And for anybody, if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. I have my mom like basically force feeding this down my dad's throat right now as we speak. Some people need to have their hands held with this, specifically older Jewish people, and it is what it is.
You want to bring it?
We can, but I mean, are we just gonna? Okay,
we'll get started.
All right, we'll just kind of keep it rolling.
Yeah, well, always need a little intro, if you will. Katie Halper is a comedian, writer, podcaster, and political commentator. Pretty good one, I might.
She's very busy. I see her all over the place. Now I just saw her on with Mike Figueredo.
Our favorite. She is the host of the Katie Halper Show, a co-host of Useful Idiots podcast, and a strong voice on the left in independent media. You got that right. Katie Halper, welcome back to Generational Change.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I noticed you've been covering this topic a lot as of late. And I know that this isn't new to you, but definitely what happened, if you would just tell, like, unless you're sick of telling the story, as to like the recap as to what happened with you on Rising. And what, like, this is, to me, is just blatant censorship, but it's just ridiculous. So if you would just tell people what the recent thing was that happened, that went down, that is really abhorrent.
Sure. Yeah. So I was at Rising for like 3 years as a weekly guest. I would come on every week. I did that when Crystal and Sagar were the hosts, and then I did it again when they had the new round of hosts. And as people probably know, Rising's shtick, if you will, is to have someone on the left and someone on the right. And I would come on as a guest, but in addition to being on as a guest, they then brought me on as a host. And I would obviously I would represent the person on the left when I was hosting. And let's see, I had done it around 3 times. I had hosted around 3 times, and I was going to host 3 more times. And when you are a host, you get to do something called a radar. So a radar is like a monologue that you deliver. And I hadn't done one of those before because I wanted to make sure I'd kind of mastered hosting. There's a lot you do when you're a host, but I hosted 3 times. And I felt good about it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do one of these radars. So I wrote a monologue. And what I decided to write the monologue about was the attacks on Rashida Tlaib, who was attacked as basically making anti-Semitic comments because she had said at virtual remarks at a Justice for Palestine conference that people were realizing more and more that you can't be progressive and celebrate Israel's apartheid government. People are realizing more and more that you can't be progressive except for on Palestine. There's actually a term for that. It's called PEP. And they also smeared her. People like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, people like, by the way, I'm happy to come on with whoever else is on right now.
We're going to introduce them. I'm letting you finish your story. So this is what happened, guys, and this is on me. So Rabbi Rosen is in the Central Time Zone, and I didn't properly and accurately respond because Peter normally does our booking, and I screwed it up. So now we're going to have him on, and we're going to all just chat. And then also the amazing Rania Khalek is here. And so we have.
Shall I?
Okay, fine. He likes to. Okay, fine.
Rabbi Brett Rosen is a Chicago-based rabbi, blogger, and social activist. He's the co-founder of the social justice focused congregation.
You're never going to be able to pronounce it. Tzedek, Chicago.
He is the author of Wrestling in the Daylight, A Rabbi's Path to Palestinian Solidarity.
Look at the copious notes, people.
Rabbi, welcome to Generational Change.
Thanks so much.
And in the other corner.
So you're joining us in the next panel, but it's all good. All
gotcha. Right. Hi, Katie.
Hi. Nice to meet
you. My very favorite Middle Eastern journalist, and she is.
How many Middle Eastern journalists are you friends with?
Not one as badass as this one.
Okay.
Rania Khalek is a Lebanese-American writer, political activist, and journalist at Breakthrough News. Her work has appeared at Common Dreams, Salon, The Nation, In These Times, Citizen Radio, and many more. Her in-depth reporting dispatches from the underclass can also be found on her website, RaniaKhalek.com. You know where you love her. Welcome back, Rania Khalek, to Generational Change.
Hi.
Hey guys, it's so good to
Hi.
see you and be back with you. Thanks for having me on.
Are you here or there? Where are you?
I'm here. I'm in Virginia at the moment.
Oh, okay. Is it so you're in our time? You're in our time zone.
I am for the next couple weeks.
Yeah. So Rabbi Rania lives in Lebanon, so
Usually,
that's why
typically,
it's like the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So Katie, finish the story.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do it quick. Sorry, I was distracted because I was trying to figure out who was coming on. So, all right.
Katie was fired.
Yeah. So
why?
I'll just, so really quickly, I'll explain what happened. So I decided to defend Rashida Tlaib and also lay out the case for why Israel is an apartheid government, because one of the things that happened after she made her comments is that Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL, from the Anti-Defamation League, smeared her and also misrepresented what she said. He said that she had imposed a litmus test on American Jews. She didn't even mention American Jews in her statements. So, and Jake Tapper, who likes to pick on Rashida Tlaib, did a little thing on her where he's like, some of her Jewish colleagues think that it was anti-Semitic for her to say what she said. So I pushed back on that allegation, and I also laid out why Israel is indeed an apartheid government. And to do that, I cited, because apartheid is actually a crime. It's a definable crime. And so I cited the United Nations, the International Criminal Court. I quoted them. I quoted Israeli law that was obviously fulfilled those criteria for apartheid. I cited international human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. I cited Palestinian human rights organizations. I quoted and cited B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization. I quoted several high-ranking Israeli officials, including prime ministers, who themselves said that Israel was either an apartheid state or was going to become an apartheid state. And I also quoted Nelson Mandela and Bishop Desmond Tutu, and also Nelady Pandor, who is a minister for the government of South Africa, who was just speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, and also said that there is a growing consensus about Israel being an apartheid state. And she, interestingly enough, cited Daniel Levy, who is an Israeli negotiator at the Oslo Accords. As I was leaving for the day, the producers called me, said, "Yeah, just want you to hear it from me. The higher ups at the Hill saw your radar, saw your monologue, and they're not going to be running it." And I asked why. She said, "Oh, there's a policy I didn't know about. It's a new policy where we don't do at the Hill. We don't do op-eds, video or written op-eds on Israel." I thought that was weird. I kind of pushed back respectfully. Was like, well, why don't you run it? And then you can have someone with an opposing view respond to it, or have me on with someone else who disagrees. I really want to get it out there. And so behind the scenes at this moment, I'm reaching out to Rania Khalek at Breakthrough News, because I really want to make sure this video gets out there. So I show her the script and she likes it. I'm talking to the producers. This was on a Monday that they refused to run the radar, and on a Monday that I recorded it. Then talking to them over the course of a few days. Wednesday, I get a call from the editor-in-chief of The Hill, who tells me that they're not going to run it. I ask him why. He says, "We got lots of pitches all the time that we pass on," which is just not how it works there. Like, I know this from my friends who work at The Hill, and Ryan Grimm, who wrote about this at The Intercept, who used to be a host at The Hill. As he mentioned, he estimates he did probably 150 of these radars, of these monologues, and nobody ever pushed back at all. Nobody even edited it or looked at it. He said, they just load them into the teleprompter, typos and all. So I didn't find that a convincing reason. Then he said it wasn't in our sweet spot of coverage because it was international, not domestic. Again, first of all, there's the Rashida Tlaib aspect, which makes it domestic, but also as someone who's both guested and hosted at the show at Rising, I know how frequently international stories come up. So then what they had told me, the producer had told me that this policy about which she hadn't known, and I believe her, I think she didn't know about this policy, that you couldn't do Israel op-eds, but that you could do segments on it. So to clarify, a segment, when I would go on every week over the course of 3 years, that was a segment. I would go on as a guest and I would talk about a story. So my understanding was that you could talk about Israel, according to this new policy, as during a story, if not a straight to a camera monologue. So I said, "So can I talk about it on my segment tomorrow?" And they said, "Check your email." And that's when I got an email from someone at the Hill saying, "We won't be needing you to come in to do your segment tomorrow. Please send any unpaid invoices. Best of luck. Luckily, speaking of luck, I did the video with Breakthrough News. So you can find the monologue, the video at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show and youtube.com/Breakthrough News.
We played it. We played
great.
it all here too. So I forget like which show ago. We played the whole thing here.
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
last week.
So that's basically the story. Brianna Joy Gray, who's at the Hill, she has decided to stay at the Hill, which I totally respect. I think like it's important to use those megaphones and those, you know, whatever the visual equivalent of that is, video cameras to get out a leftist perspective. I really appreciated that she condemned their decision. She basically said she didn't buy what they told her behind the scenes, that she said on the Hill is that I was a stylistic choice for which they didn't run the radar. I don't think anyone believed that, just because, especially when they actually saw it, there was really nothing in it that you could, I'm not beyond, you know, I'm not perfect at all, but in this particular monologue, I just don't think that there was anything you could point to that was remotely problematic stylistically. I mean, it was obviously an ideological decision. And I had also, another thing I want to clarify is a lot of people are like, oh, you obviously would get fired. You were just trying to make a point. Not at all. I had, as a guest, talked about Israel on several occasions. I said Israel lied about killing Shireen Abu Akleh. I covered Israel shuttering these human rights organizations in the middle of the night. I talked about Israel bombing a cemetery where children were visiting their grandfather's grave. So there was really no indication for me that they would not allow this kind of monologue. So that's it.
It's unbelievable,
You're off.
although yet very believable.
Yeah.
And this is the main thrust of this, is just how the media covers it and what the different sort of perspectives are, because I feel like it's very skewed here, and what we're getting is obviously not accurate. And I know, Rania, that's something that's what you do, because that's what you do, but that's not the news that most people are getting. That's the problem. And then the other side of it is the First Amendment issue about what's going on with the BDS and the amount of states that are not even, the 26 states, I think, have anti-BDS legislation on the books, where you can actually not contract with somebody. And this, I believe in Texas in January, the lawsuit was actually finished, but this censorship issue that we're having regarding what is real and what is not. And I think that's the key point that we need to talk about. Rania, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know that you see it left and right.
Of course. I mean, what really stands out to me about this is the fact that it's 2022 and this is still happening. I mean, it's like, I feel like we've been having this conversation for so many years, certainly as long as I've been in journalism and media, and even much, much longer. And it felt like things had started to get a little bit better, in the sense that I think in a lot of mainstream media outlets, you do have an increasingly larger group of people, journalists, commentators, pundits, who have a different position on this issue, who have a more progressive position on this issue. People like Katie, right? And then also like even, you have younger Jews and also younger Arabs who are like getting more positions at these outlets, are, they aren't so like ardently pro-Israel. There is more room for criticism. Yet still, it's like stunning to me how, despite the change in public opinion and even inside media outlets, you still have this insane level of censorship that's coming from the top for various reasons. And, we don't exactly know why the Hill decided to do this. We can speculate about it. I know that Katie's talked about this on a lot of shows about the change in ownership over the Hill. And that might be a part of it. The fact that there's this like Israel lobbyist who's working in an editorial position over there, that might be a part of this. I mean, what's really disturbing and outrageous about the Hill doing this of all places is that they really have tried to brand themselves as this place that opposes cancel culture and opposes censorship and likes to like air all viewpoints, no matter how extreme. And so that's what is like so stunning about this, is this does a huge disservice to your whole brand. And also it just shows your brand is complete BS. But beyond that, it shows that like, no matter how much public opinion changes, at the end of the day, there's still an element of like, this is that sort of third rail issue. No matter what happens, you can talk, there's space at outlets to like very little space, but in the narrow parameters that exist in corporate media, there's space to talk about diplomacy in Ukraine. There's some space to talk about. I don't know. There's space to a little bit of space to criticize NATO. All of these taboo issues don't necessarily get you fired. I just can't think of people who are getting fired the way that Katie was fired from The Hill, the way that Mark Lamont Hill was fired from CNN, the way that there was this actually reporter for the New York Times in Gaza who was recently let go. And it's really unclear why, but it's likely due to an editorial decision by a pro-Israel person who was in a position to push that and get rid of him.
And this organization called Honest Reporting, which also did a piece on me. Yeah.
Right, which also attacked Katie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it shows that in some ways, the change in public opinion definitely is not enough on this issue when it comes to the way that media covers it. It's some things just never change, and I'm not sure what the answer is or how to change them. I guess the best way to go about it is, at the end of the day, this is why independent media is so important. This is why it's so important to have things like Breakthrough News and things like your outlet and outlets that aren't, corporately funded and don't have to answer to people with trashy centrist or right-wing politics.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so this book, Rabbi, you originally was printed in 2012. I'm sorry to say I'm very late to this party. I wasn't that late, but late and really getting in on this. But have you noticed any progress since when this came out to where we are now in terms of the dialogue that's happening in media?
In media, I would say it's crawling. It's moving, I think, in the right direction. But then the situation that we've been talking about is an example that there's still a long way to go. And there's still that third rail that Rania was talking about. In the Jewish community, I would say it's the conversation is widening in really dramatic ways. And I think we're seeing blowback. I think we're seeing really vicious pushback to the rising numbers of members of the Jewish community, particularly younger members, who are openly speaking their conscience on the issue of Israel and proudly stating that they're Jewish and they're not Zionist and they're anti-Zionist. And I think the reason why we're hearing more and more that the trope that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is precisely because of this. I just want to mention, by the way, in my Yom Kippur sermon, last week was Yom Kippur in the Jewish community, and I started by mentioning the situation with Rashida Tlaib. And because, there's so much to say about what happened, but for me, the challenge that she puts out in that statement, that short statement, which is basically, you can't be progressive and support apartheid. It's a very simple statement, right? And, as Katie mentioned, there are so many reputable human rights advocates who are stating, and even Israeli politicians who are stating this is apartheid. You can't be progressive and support apartheid. And that, to me, on Yom Kippur, this is a direct moral challenge. That being progressive except for Palestine is unacceptable. And we can't dither on this issue. We have to make a decision. We have to make a decision to say this is wrong. If we're going to call ourselves progressives, then we have to be progressive down the line.
One of the things that I observed right after Katie was let go was the response to Wasserman Schultz's comments, as well as others.
Thank you, Katie, by the way, for focusing on that, because it was really funny to me.
Overwhelmingly, people rejected what Debbie was saying, as well as the others. The only ones who really came to Debbie's defense were the most hardcore right-wing, pro-Israel, Zionistic people. I would say if you're looking for a split, it's probably 85-90, basically, condemning what she was saying. And I think that was also reflective in the people who were willing to give Katie coverage after the fact, and probably some very similar comments were happening there. Now, it's not like Katie's going to be getting a phone call from, Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson to come on and talk about this.
Oh,
but
God.
The reaction from independent media is actually the type of reaction that we probably wouldn't have even seen 5 years ago. We have evolved quite a bit, as Rania, I'm sure you have observed. Things are definitely heading in the right direction on this issue, but it's still very, very big. And, the thing that from just my observation living down here in South Florida, the reaction is always, well, the Jews are going to be persecuted and they're going to be killed and this and that. And, how do you deal with combating that narrative of, anti-Semitism is very real. And we saw what, nincompoop Kanye West said the other day. There is this problem that can't be ignored. But I also equate it to the behavior of the Israeli government does play a significant role in the amped up anti-Semitism we're seeing today. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know who wants to take that. I think that
one thing I would just add. Oh, sorry.
No. Go.
One thing I was muted, so I didn't mean to run out, interrupting you. One thing I would say about the conflation between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is that it's pretty rich that you have the ADL and AIPAC trafficking in that idea and conflating those two things, because that's an anti-Semitic trope. I mean, anti-Semites are the ones who like to call Jews Zionists. They use the word Zionist as a shorthand for Jews. They're the ones who talk about the dual loyalty trope, which suggests that, American Jews will never be fully loyal to America because, well, I mean, I'm not really fully loyal to the American government, obviously, but that's another issue. But the idea being that you're not a real patriot, or that you're going to be concerned with the interests of Israel if you're a Jew. So it's really dangerous that in this age of actual anti-Semitism and kind of increased right-wing, alt-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist violence, that you have the ADL and the AIPAC both perpetuating an anti-Semitic stereotype, but also kind of both siding anti-Semitism and saying, well, on the right, you have people who shoot up synagogues, but on the left, you have people who support BDS. And it's just disgusting and cynical. And they don't really care about the safety of Jews. They care about Israel.
I think that's a really good point, because if you think about when instances of anti-Semitism, sometimes in the West, according to the ADL, by the way, go up, it's oftentimes when Israel's carrying out some sort of operation. And then people are reacting to that because you have a country equating itself with the Jewish people. I mean, I'll tell you, as somebody who's families from Lebanon, actually, let me tell this story first. A few years ago, the ADL did a survey in the West Bank. A survey that they said demonstrated how Palestinians in the West Bank are anti-Semitic. And if you looked at the questions on that survey, it was things like, do you think Jews have too much power? Now, if you were to ask somebody in America that and they answered, yes, I do, then yes, that would be like an anti-Semitic trope.
Right.
But if you're going to ask people who are literally living under occupation by an army that calls themselves the army of the Jewish state and literally has the Star of David like on its tanks and on its uniforms, then, I mean, that's just insane. That's just cruel to then point the finger at these people and say they're bigoted because they think Jews in an apartheid country that literally privileges Jewish people and like gives you fewer rights if you're not Jewish, that's anti-Semitic. That's insane. And like, I remember, and the same goes for even a place like Lebanon or across the Middle East. I mean, a lot of people in countries across the Middle East have very negative views about the Jewish faith because they associate it with a country that bombs them. I remember when I was a kid and I was like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years old. I was visiting Lebanon for like the first time in my life. And we were drawing, me and my cousin were like sitting around, like coloring and drawing. And I drew like a star. And the only way I knew how to draw a star was to draw 2 triangles. And I remember my aunt came into the room and she was like so horrified because I drew a Star of David. And like, that's the mentality of people in the region towards symbols of Judaism because of Israel, because it has it on the flag. So if we want to talk about what perpetuates the kind of anti-Semitism that the ADL, despises so much, if they actually cared, they would find it very problematic that there is a very aggressive apartheid country using the symbol of a religion to characterize and identify themselves. And then acting very aggressively towards people around the world, and then conflating any criticism of that country with Jewish people. I mean, it's like, that's the conversation that should be a part of the anti-Semitism conversation. And it's not, because a lot of these organizations, like Katie said, don't actually care. They don't actually care about anti-Jewish bigotry.
What's interesting is I saw somewhere recently, and it was the head of, I don't know if it was the AIPAC, the PAC, or it was the head of AIPAC, but said, we're not about Jews. That's not what we're about. Well, then if you're not about Jews, then people that disagree with you aren't anti-Semitic.
Right.
You can't have it both ways. Like, if somebody is going to claim to represent Judaism, then do so. But they're not doing that at all. Like, that's not at all what they're doing. And my question for you, Rabbi, this is my big issue, is that the fear that I was raised with, that post-Holocaust fear-based mentality as if we don't have Israel, we have nothing. The Jews are, that's it, we're screwed. And the fear is not irrational, right? Like it's a very rational fear, but then it loses its logical conclusion to having a national Jewish state will now keep us safe. Like that's where the line can't logically be connected from a rational fear. I mean, how do you explain to people that even though it's realistic to be fearful of anti-Semitism, having the state is not the solution to that?
Well, the simple answer is, are we more safe with the existence of the state of Israel? You know, Zionism, classical Zionism, held that once there was a state of Israel, anti-Semitism would disappear. That was the answer to anti-Semitism. And, you know, the irony of all of this is that Israel really depends on anti-Semitism for its raison d'etre. It needs to justify its existence because of anti-Semitism in the world. So I would say to people like that, well, what is the part of the world where Jews feel the most unsafe? You know, let's look at the state of Israel. You know, yes, there has been an alarming rise of anti-Semitism around the world, but Israel is an over-militarized garrison state. You know, that Israel has become the focus of Jewish fear. So I would simply ask people, do you feel that we're more safe for having the state of Israel in existence? You know,
yeah.
The other contradiction is that, you know, I believe it is anti-Semitic to associate all Jews with the state of Israel and the actions of the state of Israel. Absolutely.
Agreed.
But you know what? Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Israel, by its very existence, associates itself with all Jews throughout the world. It is the state for the Jews. So we are all implicated, whether we want to be or not, in everything Israel does. So Israel can't have it both ways. They can't complain about the anti-Semitism when you know, people associate Jews everywhere with its actions, but then, you know, somehow, you know, try to claim that they are the voice and the home, national home for all Jews throughout the diaspora. It's
I mean, it's like the Islamic State, like in what that did to Muslims around the world. It's like,
so I look at my congresswoman calling out anti-Semitism, and I'm like, no, she's not anti-Semitic. You're an Islamophobe. You're seeing this whole thing wrong. So my Gaisha friend here puts this up, not realizing that it was somewhat rhetorical. But I just think it was kind of funny. So it says, Rabbi Rosen, given the self-evident apartheid and collective punishment of the Palestinians, if the Israeli state doesn't recognize the long-term consequences of this behavior, shouldn't they be sent back to shul?
Whatever that means.
He thought it was like a question. I'm like, no, that's rhetorical.
Yes, I think it's a statement more than a question.
Yeah.
I would depend on what shul we're talking about, right? I mean,
yours in particular, but I mean, one of the things that really spoke to me a lot in this, seriously, my mom is now like reading this to my father. This is very important, is how much you focus on what really being Jewish is. And that to me, it really gave me this sense of, look, Judaism has existed long before Zionism and it's going to exist long after it. Like that was sort of this almost thought that I had, like really disconnecting them. But the fact that you say all of these things that you're saying are actually Jewish tradition, more so than what the state of Israel is doing, saying, oh, this is a Jewish state, isn't based on Jewish principles. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, you hear a lot today, you know, when we're going back to the issue of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, this conflation with Zionism, which is a modern nationalistic movement that was part of many different modern nationalistic movements that were going on at the turn of the century, right? It's just, this has happened to be one that emerged in Western Europe, in the Jewish world around the turn of the century, was a radical break with what Judaism had been up until that point. Consciously, I mean, it negated the diaspora. It said that Jews needed to go back to the land and create a sovereign state for the Jews, which is something that was absolutely forbidden according to traditional Judaism. That could only happen when the Messiah came. You know, it was a radical break with everything that Judaism had been. And what's amusing to me is just really, you know, half a century later, we're now saying that Zionism and Judaism are one and the same. So we need to really, and by the way, I want to say that it's not necessarily a modern Jewish movement that breaks with traditional Judaism. It's not in and of itself a bad thing, right? I mean, I'm a liberal Jew. I'm part of a modern Jewish movement that breaks with traditional Judaism as well. I think the issue is what it has created. What is it advocating for? It's advocating for an ethno-national, exclusively Jewish state in historic Palestine, which is a place that has always been multi-ethnic and multi-religious, and has created a Jewish majority state that had to dispossess other people in order to exist. And that is counter to just about every Jewish value that I could list for you. You know, I would argue that it's actually, from a Jewish values point of view, quite un-Jewish. I wouldn't deny the Jewishness of those who are Zionist. I just say that that's not the Judaism that we should be upholding in the world.
The Tikkun Olam.
Absolutely. You know, Tikkun Olam is a central Jewish ethic of healing the world. I don't think ethno-national militarized states are involved in Tikkun Olam.
Neither do I.
So in this book, just for anybody who doesn't realize, this is the rabbi it was a blog that you started in 08 or 09, and you printed the blog and the discussions that followed, which is really interesting, like watching certain people like parrot certain talking points and just go back and forth. But it's really very interesting how different people view what does that mean to be Jewish. It's very, very different for a lot of people and what that means. But I feel like at its core, we should kind of agree that it doesn't mean it's okay to oppress another group of people. Like, right? Like there should be a certain basic sense. And yet you are like more considered like fringe by the people like in this, then really it's just common sense.
Well, it's like Rashida Tlaib saying you can't be progressive and support apartheid. You just can't do it.
Well, they
it's
say
not possible.
Apartheid. They refuse to hear that. They refuse to hear that. And even saying that is sacrilegious. You know what I mean? Like you can't.
Well, this is our generation's South Africa.
So B'Tselem is an anti-Semitic organization then. Right?
That's what I keep pointing to. Right. It's a cabal of self-loathing Jews. I mean, an interesting argument I keep seeing, and I'm going to have on my show, which is at youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show. But on Tuesday, I'm having it's going to be a great discussion with Noura Erakat, who's a brilliant human rights lawyer, Palestinian-American human rights lawyer, and Miko Peled, who is the son of a decorated Israeli general on the one side of his family, and then his mother's father was a signatory to Israeli independence. And one of the things I'm going to look at is I want to push back on some of the talking points, and there are a lot of them. There really are. But a big argument against the fact that Israel's an apartheid state is people are like, well, it's not racial the way it was in South Africa. And funnily enough, some of these people are quoting Amnesty International. I'm like, okay, you're quoting an organization that has deemed Israel an apartheid state. And you know, I don't think people realize that by saying, oh, it's not racial the way it was in South Africa, they're actually like reifying race, which is a social construct, and they're giving it legitimacy and pretending like that's a real thing that they were doing. Whereas Arabs and Jews are one and the same. And I get the like political, I mean, I think that we do need to be focusing on the fact that there is a lot of coexistence, despite the way that people frame it as like an inevitable conflict, like Jews and Arabs just can never coexist. But obviously that's not really the point of defining apartheid.
Also, that totally takes away from the fact that there are Jewish Arabs. They just don't call them that.
Right.
That Israel, as a Zionist settler colonial country, has imposed like a European history on,
right,
which is really unfortunate because some of the oldest Jewish communities in the world actually come from Arab countries.
Right.
But I just want to add to that to say, like, we should always remember the U.S. role here too, because at the end of the day, what is Israel? It's a European creation, right? It's a European settler colonial entity that imposed a sectarian state on the Middle East to act as basically to act as a tool of imperialism. And that's the role it continues to play today, along with its open allies like the United Arab Emirates, like increasingly the Saudis, at least overtly. They've always covertly been allies. Like all of these sort of despotic Gulf states. I mean, these are all weapons of imperialism in the region. And I always feel like it's very important to reiterate that, because so often you'll start to hear people say, "Oh, Israel controls U.S. foreign policy," and while there, of course, is this these Israel lobbying outfits that try to push for policies that benefit Israel in the region, that is just also default American policy for reasons that benefit America. Israel plays a major role policing the region, whether we're talking about the role it plays against Hezbollah in Lebanon or against Iran, basically just like helping to reinforce American hegemony across the Middle East. And I think that the best thing that can happen for the Middle East and for Palestinians and Israelis is for the U.S. to be less involved. The less involved the U.S. in the Middle East is in the Middle East, the more it forces players in the region to actually deal with each other, and then doesn't give one side this like huge edge over the other side. So I feel like that needs to be a big part of like the way we talk about this discussion, or the way we have this discussion, and the sort of policies that we pushed is like the U.S. needs to get out and stop like arming this country to the teeth.
Couldn't have said it better, and I think that this is a great segue to what I guess was sort of the inflection point for you, Jen,
Yeah, it was my last straw.
to get involved with this.
Well, I mean, I was always, don't say I wasn't involved, but to host this particular, like the timing of
Sure.
this. Okay.
But of course, we all saw what happened to Congressman Levin in Michigan. This was a hit job, if there ever was one. They did not. Now but I kind of see it as the whole concept of Israel apartheid. It's becoming somewhat of a wounded animal because now they have to go after their own. And the fact that they decided, okay, now we have to take out a person who's also president of a Jewish congregation, who's also a congressman, because he dared to suggest that Palestinians had equal rights to Israeli Jews.
And who's a Zionist, by the way.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Put in, what did AIPAC put in? $5 million for Representative Stevens to take him out. And the people and I happen to know somebody who worked on Stevens' campaign. She refuses to talk to me. She's like in total denial about what actually went on in that campaign. Nevertheless, I think that what happened to Andy is a significant inflection point for a lot of people that should be looking at this as we really have to have an honest conversation about this right now. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I mean, it was the impetus for me, mostly because not just that they went after somebody who's Jewish. I mean, I've been called self-loathing Jew by, a lot of people, so it's not foreign to me. But the fact of how minor what I would even say an infraction. It wasn't like he even did anything, and they just so down his throat. And I think it really shows, like, it concerns me. And I do think the power of groups like AIPAC should be very concerning to people, not just as that they're, any lobbying organization, but how they completely reframe the narrative and keep us from really having discussions because there's no nuance. So you have people just accusing everyone of being anti-Semitic because you support BDS instead of having actual discussion. So it's almost like groups to me like AIPAC are perpetuating this complete ignorance among a lot of American Jews and their refusal to accept reality. And it's very scary to me how powerful they're getting. So it was really more that than just, they spent money against him. Yes, but they're changing the whole narrative so that and I think it is because they're scared. I do. I think that very well could be it.
I think it's AIPAC and the Israel lobby, but it's also something that's going on in the Democratic Party right now. And I think that's a really important piece. The Democratic majority for Israel was very, very involved in these hit jobs during the primaries. And it wasn't only Andy Levin. I mean, there were progressive Democratic candidates across the country who were basically shot down. And we see this war going on within the Democratic Party. I mean, I have to tell you, every time I hear Rashida Tlaib go up and speak her mind as a Democratic congressperson, this is a Palestinian who is saying these things as a Democratic politician. There are forces in the Democratic Party that are absolutely galled that this is going on and are trying to, what is to their mind, take back their power by any means necessary. Civil war that's going on within the Democratic Party itself. And, I think it's playing out. They've chosen Israel as the arena to play this out. It's not the only place it's happening. But I absolutely agree with you that it's something that we have to pay attention to, because what happened in the primaries was really abysmal.
Yeah, they're only getting more powerful though. Like they're realizing how successful they were, and they're really just heating up. Like they're just getting going. And really, my dream would be for there to be an anti-AIPAC PAC. I would like there to be a PAC that every time AIPAC donates money to someone, there's another PAC that donates to the person that the AIPAC's trying to beat. Like I'd love there to be like they match it. You know, that would be like my goal.
And the other thing that's so disturbing about this is that they always, like, none of these, like, Democratic Majority for Israel, AIPAC, they never say explicitly when they're like campaigning against the person that they're bad on this question, that it has anything to do with Israel, Palestine. It's always about, like, they try to just critique them in general. And they spend so much money on these ads and mailers and TV spots. And then that person loses, and then they pretend that they lost because of the Israel-Palestine thing, which people didn't even know about because they never talk about it in their ads against them.
Because no one's voting on that. I mean, the vast majority of people are not voting on that issue. So it's actually very smart on their part to do it that way.
It depends on where you live. I got to tell you, like this district, it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I just mean, like, it's very specific to like a district here or there. It's not an issue that like people in most places are voting on. Most people are not one issue voters. Right. And that issue too is like, it's like the parties are they're basically, the policy is almost identical, but it's hard to even differentiate yourself. So it really will only play out in like primaries, like with these like small Democratic primaries. But this is a fight that's been ongoing, I think, since it really heated up in 2016 when Bernie Sanders made a huge pivot over this issue. He went from, I remember in 2014, like there was people who went to one of his
town halls
in Vermont, well, some of his constituents. And it was during the war on Gaza that year. It was like probably the most vicious war to date that Israel has carried out against Gaza. And, you know, Bernie Sanders like had these like pro-Palestine people removed from his town hall. And he went from that to really changing, you know, his views on this issue and changing how he spoke about it publicly in a pretty significant way. AIPAC. You guys remember there was a Brooklyn debate between him and Hillary Clinton. And,
I was there.
You know, Hillary Clinton was like, Hamas dresses up as civilians so that when they die, you count them as civilians. And then Bernie Sanders was like, actually, Palestinians are like human beings.
Yeah.
It's pretty much all he pretty much said. Palestinians are human beings. And Jake Tapper was like horrified. Like Jake Tapper was like, it was as though he heard somebody like praise Hitler. And anyways, it was a really big deal though, because for the first time on a national stage, somebody who had a real chance at the presidency was speaking this way. And that, I think, is what provoked Democrats, pro-Israel Democrats, the elites of the party, to really come out hard in as many ways as possible to try to suppress what is a really dramatic change in public opinion, particularly in the Democratic Party. If you poll people on this issue, the age gap is huge. But like anybody below the age of like 40 sympathizes, I think, more with Palestinians, which is like, you know, that's horrible future prospects for being able to have a pro-Israel party. So they have to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, that's why the backlash is so fierce. They know this is happening. You know, I remember that debate really well. I remember the response. I think Bernie's words were, "We have to respect the humanity of the Palestinians," and there was this huge uproar, you know, on both sides. Right. I remember I have at the time a Palestinian friend of mine said, "This is how bad things are for us. That simply mentioning that we're human beings causes this much of an uproar." You know, just the simple fact of acknowledging their humanity, and that so we have to keep some perspective. That yes, it was a breakthrough, but it was a breakthrough just by mentioning that they happen to be human.
Right. The bar is so low.
Sharing a stage with someone who's still using that sort of human shield talking point on a national stage, which is not a true thing like that. So you have somebody running for president, standing on a national stage and parroting something that we know isn't accurate and just gets away with it as if it's somehow just stating a fact.
Talking about Hillary?
Yes, I'm talking about Hillary. They're dressing up and so they could count this. Who says stuff like that? That's like the people who say these are people that use their children as human shields.
They love their children. They don't love their children as much as Israelis do. They like Arabs just don't. They hate life.
Well, neither do Russians.
The golden mic here.
No, none of those people love their children.
And I think it goes without saying that if you need any further proof that this is intentional, look what happened 2 weeks ago when the DNC met in DC, and they had an opportunity. And again, they used this talking point, and God love Tom Hartman. He's on our show many times. This idea that, well, we have to fight back against the GOP. Okay, that may work, but not in primaries. And the Democrats refuse to block dark money in primaries, which means that they are allowing AIPAC and every other organization that is corporate, pro-Israel, whatever.
They wouldn't even vote on it.
They wouldn't even have a vote because they know they don't want to expose them. It's no different than bringing a floor vote on Medicare for all because they know exactly where the votes are going to fall. Like our ridiculously terrible representative we have here in South Florida. So it goes without saying that as much as they try to continue to perpetuate this idea that, well, we're really just fighting the bad guys. No, you're
Right.
bad.
You're all bad.
You're all so bad.
Yeah. So awful.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that unfortunately there was also a backlash because a few years back, I'm sure you all might remember this, there was a lot of activism on college campuses, and it was like they were, a lot of pro-Palestine groups, in fact, oftentimes led by like anti-Zionist Jews. A lot of pro-Palestine groups across the country were making headway and basically like winning and taking over student councils and being able to like divest, put forth bills to divest from companies that profit off of, Israeli occupation, and even bigger than that, to divest from companies that are a part of like the military industrial complex in general. And this was happening all across the country, at schools across the country, even at Ivy League schools. And it kind of hit its peak around 2014. And there was a huge pushback against that also by the Israel lobby. That was, I think, quite successful because now you just don't see the same level of like effectiveness on college campuses that you did 5 or 6 years ago, unfortunately. And one of the ways that was done was by using other wars in the Middle East to sort of fracture the Palestine solidarity movement, especially the issue of Syria, which I think had devastating consequences on the Palestine solidarity movement and still has those splits still exist now, which is really unfortunate. But I think that's something that we have to like learn from as people who are in these spaces is the more successful we are, in these small and big ways, the more successful our side is, we always have to expect a very strong counter to that. Because what is being proven over and over again is despite sort of like history and public opinion, like being, against Israel and in favor of Palestine and in favor of liberation, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it's going to go, because the more powerful side is still the Israeli side, the imperialist side, the American side, and they have so much money, so many resources, and a lot of tricks up their sleeve. And so it's like we have to like learn from these kinds of moments and be prepared with how to deal with them. And I think what happened to Katie is another lesson. And like, I actually did think, I was like, oh, the media censorship is obviously, the media is still totally one-sided on this issue, but like getting fired over it isn't happening anymore. That's really cool. And then what happened to Katie happened.
Over my style.
Yeah, over your style.
My stylistic.
And this wasn't
Is it like your
CNN
dress
or NBC.
style or
My
like
hair.
the way you, after 3 years of being at the Hill, it took them
Right.
3 years to realize they didn't like Katie's style.
I wonder what happened that made them
You're,
realize
you're too honest.
But I do think that all of these things, when things come together, the more they come together and the bigger the web gets, then it starts to become the inevitable shift. Like that's how it happens. So I just think it's important to kind of keep harping on it and keep kind of connecting all the people together that are on the same page with this. I think it's really important for people to hear it from all different sides, that this is what's happening, even though you don't like it, and it's very uncomfortable for you to hear. And that's the key thing, is a lot of the Jewish people are not willing to be uncomfortable. And it's very uncomfortable to do some of this, especially for people who previously had a lot of love for the idea of the state of Israel, who wanted to make Aliyah, and people who wanted, and this was not easy for me. So I can't imagine how hard it has been for people like you, Rabbi, and that have had to like really have I call it a come to Jesus moment, ironically, but it's very hard. And so I understand how hard it is for other people to accept this, and that's what it is. It's like they have a cognitive dissonance that's massive.
You have a family member.
I do. Well, I have a lot of family.
The one in particular.
I have a few. I have family in Israel. Well, one of my cousins actually lived in one of the settlements, and they're very gung ho. Oh, they're in it to win it, and it's very unfortunate. You know, I just, it's hard. Some people are just too far gone in that way, but I'm hoping that we can reach a lot of people, at least stateside, that can be reasoned with. And when you teach people facts, that they might want to incorporate that into their opinion. You know, like you might want to consider this information.
And we really have to get better collectively on the left in particular. And I shouldn't even say the left. It's the non-corporate, you know, working side of politics that, you know, we don't seem to be very good at coalition building. And we really need to get better at it, because the conservative side, I mean, for God's sake, they're going to potentially get Herschel Walker into the freaking Senate. I mean, that is just, that is because they all get in line and they all have a common mission, and that's it. They don't care what a buffoon he is, their attitude is. And give Dana Loesch, who's the head of the NRA, credit for what she said, though, which is, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to us is winning. We don't care how crappy the person is. We don't care how much of a hypocrite he is or how pathetic it makes us look. If we have the votes and we get to vote on what we want, then that's it. This is a blood sport as far as they're concerned. Yeah. And for us, if we're trying to enact, you know, really serious change, you know, for any big channel that's out there that hasn't reached out to Katie to give her a platform to talk about how significant this is, you know, wake up. We all need to be working in concert together, because it's the only way it's ever going to change. Rania, you do an amazing job. And, you know, obviously, Rabbi, you know, what can we say? I mean,
Rabbi, would you come back on at some point? Because I actually really have some significant notes. Like I could almost like write a dissertation at this point. So would you come back at some point and talk about this book? Okay.
I'd be happy to.
One last thing before you guys go.
He feels the need to do this
for you. It's necessary.
It's necessary.
I just want to say.
Oh my God! Whoa!
Wow, that's scary.
That's trippy.
My name was enacted, Katie. You're doing a wonderful job. I appreciate what you're doing, Rania.
Wow.
Keep people safe in the Middle East. It's very necessary. And Rabbi, I'm ever in Chicago, I'll come to one of your sermons. I'm sure it's wonderful. Listen, the American people have not given up hope yet. I'm a very proud Jew, but of course I understand there is apartheid in Israel, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for that, Jen. You know, just understand.
I do.
Keep fighting the good fight. There are a lot of good people out there who understand that Israelis and Palestinians can live together in peace and harmony.
Like your good friend Joe.
My good friend Joe.
Joe is not your friend.
No, Joe is definitely my friend. He's a good guy. And we're going to keep fighting. You know, the midterms are around the corner. Don't know what's going to happen in 24. You're not going to drag me out to do a third term, but we're going to find somebody who's reasonable.
Yeah, good luck with that, Bernie.
Yeah, good luck,
Grateful. No, you're all doing a wonderful job. So just want to come on here and say thank you for bringing attention to a very important issue. And God bless you.
I feel like you're mocking it.
I'm not mocking it.
Okay.
I wish you would fight harder, but listen, you know, like you said, you know, Bernie brought us to a point where we're so much more aware now than we ever were 5-6 years ago. And it is on us. He's right. It's not me, us. It's like we all have to work collectively together. And with that said, the floor is yours. Katie, you start. Whatever you want to plug.
She wants to plug the Katie Halper Show.
Yes.
Yeah, the Katie Halper Show. Also, there's a great article by Branko Marcetic. Maybe you can put it in the show notes, but he wrote a great piece at Jacobin. It's called Left-Wing Journalist Katie Halper has been fired for calling Israel an apartheid state. But read that, because he reveals different interesting things at the Hill, like these conflicts of interests. They hired a guy who used to be at the Israeli consulate. He ran the media for the Israeli consulate in New York. And yeah, youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. If you just subscribe, that helps. Just like hitting subscribe and then pressing the bell, liking the videos. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, Rania, talk about dispatches, because I watch my dispatches. That's where I get the stuff that I would otherwise never know. I mean,
that's nice to hear. That's good to hear. So I work for Breakthrough News. Everybody should go follow Breakthrough News on YouTube. It's an independent media outlet. I'm so lucky to be able to work there. Not very many like it exist. And I host a show called Dispatches, which is a video and audio podcast. You can follow it on, you know, Spotify, Apple, and you can also, you know, subscribe to Breakthrough News on YouTube, and make sure you get the notifications, or you click the little notification button and you can get a notification whenever there's a new episode. I do about 1 or 2 a week on all kinds of issues, and I'm pretty good at finding pretty cool guests. And I also host the Freedom Side with Eugene Puryear every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's live. We always have like a bunch of guests on whatever is happening in the news that week from, of course, a leftist perspective. So follow Breakthrough News. And of course, Breakthrough News is what the outlet that, produced Katie Halper's censored segment. So I think it's like a really good.
Fantastic job on that, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, Katie wrote a fantastic script and delivered it brilliantly. And I'm glad that we were able to do stuff on the video side of that. And so you got to support outlets. You got to support outlets like Breakthrough News. You got to support people like Katie Halper so that we can produce that stuff, but may also make it look really, really good, because, we need resources for that. So for those who are watching who can, I encourage you to do what you can to support our shows.
High production values do bring in the eyeballs. It definitely makes a difference.
And Rabbi, where can people find? I mean, I know. Do you still keep your blog? Is it current?
Yeah, I'm just listening. I'm just a humble rabbi. I don't generate nearly as much content as Katie and Rania, but I don't blog as much as I used to. I was a blogging fiend, but I do post. If you want to read all my sermons, including one on anti-Zionism that I gave on Yom Kippur, it's rabbibrant.com.
You got to get on Substack. You should just write on Substack also.
Yeah, it's probably just a matter of time.
Yeah, but you write very well.
Thank you.
Which I'm sure the truth is that a lot of rabbis can write really well. I mean, it's not like that's a stretch, but it's easy read and not complicated, but it's very good. I really liked it a lot.
You guys are fantastic. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for coming on, Katie,
Thanks for having us.
Rabbi.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Always a pleasure. Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you soon. Well, as you can imagine, it's not the easiest, like you said, topic to talk about, but when you have that type of support network having your back, it does make it easier.
It's getting bigger and bigger.
It is.
It's getting more and more acceptable.
And again, the thing that I pointed out, which I think cannot be understated, is when Debbie tried to pull her little stunt, which she always does every once in a while.
Like it's a mitzvah.
The reaction to Debbie was not overwhelming, more than overwhelming, like almost completely negative.
Good.
Like, Debbie, shut up.
Please.
Or, Debbie, get the hell out of Congress.
Please.
That would be wonderful, too. But we'll see what happens.
I swear to you, people, if she was decent, I wouldn't even be sitting here.
But
I would have been living my happy little mountain life, doing my little art. And
you know what I think Debbie does? Every once in a while, you feel like your mind's drifting away and you just want to get out of Dodge. And then Debbie's like,
she just is the gift that keeps giving, because she'll say something or do something that infuriates me to no end, like her, specifically going after Rashida Tlaib.
Now, if you think she infuriates you, I can only imagine how many people infuriate our last and final guest, who we love very, very much, who has written a wonderful book called Prejudential.
Which I was, again, another one of those very inconvenient things for me to have to hear. Like, it's like, that's the thing, people. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable when you challenge a narrative that you've been used to and hearing. And one of those narratives, before we bring Margaret on, I just want to say this, because growing up in a very pro-Zionist community, family, so on and so forth, one of the entanglements that was an end result of that for a lot of people, because I'm not going to say, there's no way I'm the only one, was this sort of irrational connection with a lot of leaders in the Black community as being anti-Semitic. And back then, I didn't know any different. I'm like, why? And granted, there very well might be some people in the community that are anti-Semitic, but the gist of that was that these were Black leaders that were speaking out in solidarity with oppressed Palestinians. And there is a very, very strong link, especially amongst the actual left, not the political left, the actual left, in terms of what settler colonialism is, what imperialism is, and oppressed people are oppressed people. And so there's this solidarity with Black liberation, which to me, not necessarily confused with Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's more of just a modern kind of organization. I'm just talking about the theoretical Black liberation and oppressed Palestinians. And so I really wanted to talk about that. I think it's really important. And I have a certain amount of guilt for not knowing more about this sooner and actually believing that people were anti-Semitic without even thinking about it. So anyway, that's where we are. So
Margaret Kimberly is an historian, a writer, and an activist for peace and justice issues. She is co-founder, executive editor, and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report. Got to get Danny Haifong on the podcast. She is the author of Presidential Black America and the Presidents.
It ain't
Margaret Kimberly, no, it ain't. Margaret Kimberly, welcome back to Generational Change.
Hi, how are you? It's good to be here.
good. It's good to have you. So the other person who was going to be on this panel had to cancel. So it is all you. It's all on you. You know the entire Black liberation movement right now.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Okay, all right, I can do it.
So one thing that I thought was really interesting. So I was doing a little research yesterday, and I came across this really cool quote. That this was a James Baldwin article that was written. I want to say, I didn't photograph the date. I know there were a couple of articles. I think this is one from like 70 something, where he is talking about the state of Israel was not created for the salvation of Jews. It was created for the salvation of the Western interests. This is what is becoming clear. The Palestinians have been paying for the British colonial policy of divide and rule, and for Europe's guilty Christian conscience for more than 30 years. Finally, there is absolutely no hope of establishing peace in what Europe so arrogantly calls the Middle East without dealing with the Palestinians. And so this was something from someone who most of their writing is about liberation and oppression and imperialism. So, and of course, I never saw this connection then. So would you just talk a little bit about the history here and when, because I know there have been several points in Black history in America where there has been more of a connection to what is going on in with Palestinians.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back with you guys. I think it's historic. The first people, Black people in the U.S., to talk about this dilemma of the creation of the state of Israel as a settler colonial project, as a product of imperialism, of British imperialism. It goes back a long way to, I mean, people think about, I don't know, Lawrence of Arabia or something like that, which tells you the European powers, how they carved up the Middle East, how they created some of these countries. You know, the borders of Iraq were created by Winston Churchill or something like that. So there were people, anti-imperialist people, the Paul Robesons, the W.E.B. Du Bois, and others who spoke about Zionism and the problematic nature of Zionism pretty early on. We had people like Malcolm X who visited Palestine in the early 60s and wrote about it, wrote a column called On Zionist Logic, I believe. It was called. But support for the Palestinian people, for their human rights, has always been a mainstay of the Black radical tradition. But as that tradition was marginalized politically, along with, as you were saying in the previous segment, marginalized politically, it's something that has been ignored or condemned, or as you were saying, people can very easily be called anti-Semitic if they deviate from the support Israel, no questions asked narrative at all. Or if somebody makes a problematic, inelegant statement about Jewish people in the United States. Jesse Jackson's campaign, the High Me Town remark was, I mean, it's decades later, it's still brought up. So it's a very, very long history. It goes into the present day. Black Lives Matter, the organization, made a brief statement in support of the Palestinian people 2021 in May. Was very, I thought, reasonable. But if you want to marginalize anyone who says anything in support of Palestinians, then of course that makes it problematic when it isn't. But we have a very long and strong history here of people making the connections with apartheid as was practiced in South Africa, and feeling comfortable because it's, the evidence is there that Israel is also an apartheid state. But the problem, of course, comes from the opposition, which is Israel gets bipartisan support. And as the other things that you were discussing happen to Black people. But I think it's even worse. There is, when Black people step out of line on anything, the punishment is always more severe. You had people losing seats in Congress, people of being afraid of losing even any elected office. It can be even a local office, like here in New York in the city council. So those are some of the things that I want to bring up today.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. And I think that one of the things that always I had heard, like growing up, whenever somebody who was Black would speak in favor of anything Palestinian, of course they'd be as anti-Semitic, but then there was this additional thing that was always thrown in. And this was definitely a Jewish community type of thing where, but we're so good to them. We're so Jews have always supported Black. Jews have always supported, like, that's the kind of like thought process. And it was almost like they, and I say they, I mean, I never said that, but that was the cultural thing. But it was almost like these Jews were taking themselves completely out of the fact that, yes, but you're also white. You're also part of the imperialist Western Eurocentric problem. So you can't disentangle that. But they're like, but we've always been good to the Blacks. Like, they really, and I'm telling you, literally, that's what I've heard say.
Just take your cookie and be thankful.
And they really couldn't wrap their head around it. And to some extent, I feel like that also is very the same thing for how the Democratic Party treats Blacks. It's almost like, but we've been so good to you. Come out and vote for us. We've been so good to you. How could you not like us?
Well, but you're right. And I know those people who, I remember the former mayor of New York City, Ed Koch, who I never liked. But anyway, he's now dead. But I don't feel like I can't say that I dislike somebody who's now
wait, before you go on,
departed.
I had an aunt. This is a famous quote from my aunt. If you have nothing good to say about the dead, say nothing. They're dead. Good. There you go.
So Koch was, a problematic figure in New York City. I think he served 3 terms in late 70s. I'm sorry, I think mostly the 80s and early 90s. He
was there in the late 70s to the early mid 80s. That was his
That was
time.
it? Okay. Oh, that's right. He was late 70s. No, it was 12 terms. Sorry, I'm thinking. I know he left office in 9. So it's like late 70s to like 1989 or 90.
He was mayor till David Dinkins, and I think
Right, I think it's 1990. But in any case, he was, thank you, very problematic person. I always felt he was a racist. Most Black people did. But he was very much dedicated Zionist to the point where he, when Reagan ran against Carter, I guess that was 1980, he practically endorsed Reagan. I mean, he had this party for him at Gracie Mansion. And then he said, well, I didn't actually use the word endorsement, but he was angry about some UN vote at the UN that Carter had supported. But he, in his racism, his very paternalistic and nasty, but he was a nasty person anyway, attitude towards Black New Yorkers, he would always say, but I marched in the South, but I went down for the freedom rides. And that was always one of the things that's supposed to shut Black people up. All somebody has to say is, I fill in the blank with Dr. King.
Right.
I went down south. I protested against segregation. And that was supposed to be the thing that would quiet any criticism from Black people. So he is an example, and I'm thinking of him as a prominent person who used to do that. But I've been, and I can imagine him saying, I've been good to Black people. I went to Mississippi in Freedom Summer. So what the hell? Everybody just be quiet. So I think that's definitely something that does still happen. And now with the Democratic Party, it's even worse because, it's like the Republican Party or the racist white people's party. And we not only get this You know, haven't we been good to you? I mean, it's been decades since you can think of anything significant as far as I'm concerned. And those things happened as a result of the mass movement. So it was not like some benevolent act. Um, so it's, well, you have nowhere to go. You don't have anywhere else to go. What are you going to do? Are you going to, and they still, you know, I feel like there needs to be a statute of limitation on Donald Trump's name. Well, you know, it could be like Trump, you know, is that what you want again? So we get this double and triple whammy
Totally.
of this kind of a blackmail, political blackmail and vote shaming and racism that can all be wrapped up together when Israel is the topic of discussion.
Right. And I also think that in certain parts of like the more left, in the real left, not the political left, the actual left, that it's just common sense. It's common sense that oppressed people would relate to other oppressed people. It's really not a stretch. And where it really becomes difficult, and I think especially here, is that most of the, I would say, centrist people, Jews in particular, still do not acknowledge that they are actually oppressing people. They don't. There's the amount of mental gymnastics that is required to be a liberal kind of, you know, Jew towing the line. Oh, we need a two-state solution. Whatever your little talking point is, the mental gymnastics is exhausting. And quite honestly, that's where I finally was like, you know what? I am way too old, and I cannot keep doing this dance. And I think that people in the Black community, they've just seen it before so many times. It's so commonplace that, yeah, there's people being oppressed. Of course, there's people being oppressed. And I think that when we're talking about the Jewish community, by and large, is not in this country, is not an oppressed people. In fact, they're generally a thriving people in this country. Yeah. And so they don't understand, well, what are we doing wrong? They're allowed, and the best one is, they allow Palestinians, they have parties, they're in parliament, they allow them to have votes, right? Like it's the same mentality. And it's like, yes, well, Black people can vote here too. Does that mean that their votes are properly being counted?
You know, another thing that happens here is I was thinking about this as I listened to you talk. There's this collusion where the media hides the worst policies in Israel. So, for example, not only can Palestinians be evicted from their homes, but the government forces people to tear down their own house. And if you don't tear down your own house, they charge you money for they're going to destroy your home. But if they do it instead of you, then you're charged this fine of thousands of dollars, of little kids being used as human shields, the people who are in prison. I mean, I could go on. You all know this stuff. Yeah, but it's something that the media hide. So, for example, when Amnesty International finally said what they should have said years ago, that Israel is an apartheid state, they were either condemned or, in the case of the New York Times, they just did not report it, ever.
Right.
They just never reported it. So you hide the worst things, all of the things that most sensible people would look at and say, well, that's wrong. So those things are hidden. And I think it helps people who are going through those mental gymnastics to defend their position, because they get to use all the positive talking points. Well, there's Arabs in parliament, there's something like that, but they're not confronted with the things that no one can deny are the nature of an apartheid state. So, and there's political collusion, where politicians are, so for example, here in New York City, where I live, members of the city council, now they're local elected officials. They don't have anything to do with foreign policy, but they always make these junkets to Israel, always. And whoever's the head of the city council, when there's, the next attack on Gaza, will say, we stand with Israel. Israel is being terrorized, while there are other people in Gaza being terrorized. So that sends a message that even if you're a local or state elected official and you don't have anything to do with foreign policy, it's clear that's where the line is going to be towed. If you want to raise money and you have to raise money to run for office, then you won't get money, or somebody who runs against you will get money instead of you. All of those things serve to silence. But the people aren't fooled, and so you may uh, people may silence themselves, but they have not changed their minds. I think 90% of Black people, if you ask them, would say that just to in a very general terms, they know that Palestinians are being treated unfairly. They know they're being oppressed, and they want that to stop. But all of these things that we've talked about um, diminish that level of outspokenness that people should have.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking since we started this about like the Zionist narrative, and it's very propagandized. It's very one-sided. It's very controlling. And not just here. I would imagine it's probably the same in a lot of like in Europe and places like that, just like kind of Western centric idea of what is going on. And so I still would like to believe, and maybe I'm wrong, that if my great grandmother was told, okay, there was this thing, it was called the Nakba, and all these people were displaced and killed, and that's what needed to happen, that they would have said, oh, no, that's not good. No. They were never taught that. They were never told that. And that same false narrative is still being perpetuated, whether it's things like, yes, the Hamas uses children as human shields. These kinds of narratives are what our media is portraying. And so it's exceptionally hard to get people to think things are oppressive when we can't even get facts. I just want, if everybody had the same facts and then you decided, oh, I think Israel should still be an ethnocracy and the Jews still need a place, fine. But you can't say it's a democracy and you can't say it's not an apartheid state. You have to own what it is. You cannot have an ethno-state without an ethno-cleanse. It doesn't work. And there are just too many people that are not seeing what's going on there because this information is so censored and so not available where we need it to be. And
credit to Yuli New, who should have been the next congressional representative of New York's, I believe, 10th congressional district.
Yeah.
She spoke out against Israel apartheid in the middle of a congressional race in a very Jewish congressional district. And that takes guts. Like, it really does. And she should be the congresswoman, but we all know how New York politics is, Margaret.
Yes.
But sometimes it pays to be principled. Now, I don't know if Jen is going to run against Debbie again, but I do know that just by doing this, your attitude was, well, look, if I am going to be a formidable, opponent to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, then AIPAC's going to get involved. So I might as well play offense than play defense, because everyone else plays defense when it comes to AIPAC.
I'm not waiting for them to come for me. I'm throwing down with them. You want to come for me? That's fine. You want to tell me I'm a selfish? I am just over you. I am so done with them stealing the narrative. As a Jew, quite honestly, I feel used by Zionist movement. I feel lied to. I feel betrayed. I have a lot of anger. And so if people like AIPAC want to come at me and try to out-Jew me, I will play them every single time, because Judaism existed long before Zionism and it's going to exist long after. And we don't need your nonsense anymore. That's how I feel.
Well, that's great. I mean, but we need more courage. It's not only do we need people to have that kind of courage that you've described, but we also need mass movements. The reason the propaganda works and the media and the money is that we have this politics that disconnects people, and deliberately so, on any number of issues. They don't want people to have they want voters to be uninformed. And if voters are uninformed, they can get away with a lot in any number of ways. But I also want to call out these people who, want to pretend they don't know. So how does it happen that after, for example, the BDS movement starts to take hold, that state after state after state basically make BDS illegal?
26.
So most states have said that they'll be penalized some way, that you can't get state money if you boycott Israel, or some states make I remember Texas. I think there was a court case that finally did away with it. If you were just a contractor for the state doing anything, you had to sign this oath, in effect, saying that you would not, or even speak about, boycotts of Israel. So those things don't happen by accident. So I think people, it's so helpful to be innocent, right, and claim you. And people speaking out against it. So it's playing dumb, and as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, certainly, and as far as our political people, like, someone like Debbie Wasserman Schultz doesn't get, I mean, she could sit there and just accuse everybody of being anti-Semitic, but I don't buy for a minute that she doesn't know the truth, right? Like, I don't believe that for a second, but I'm just regular people who really are not exposed to the right amount of information. Most of my Jewish friends never heard of the Nakba, never heard of it.
Well, I didn't. I'm going to say I heard the word Nakba maybe 10 years ago,
Right.
10 years ago. And I thought of myself as this well-informed. Nobody's that well-informed. You always learn something new. But I heard the term, and I remember being very angry that I was like, how have I gotten to be middle-aged and I never heard this word Nakba, which is catastrophe, I believe, in Arabic, that after the state of Israel, basically Palestinians being pushed out of the country, refugee camps. It's one of many things we aren't taught in school. And so there is official propaganda. It's the media. It's Hollywood. I mean, think of the movies that were made about Israel. It's always Israel is the hero or the victims of terrible people. I mean, there've been a couple movies made about the after the Israeli athletes were killed at the Munich Olympics, and Israel sent these commandos out to kill people who were responsible, some of whom were not responsible also. That's never brought up, but it's one-sided. These people were the evil people. These people are the good people. So the corporate media, the news media, the entertainment media, we get it from every direction. And then, of course, you have people who are afraid. So as you were saying in the with the last guest, Bernie Sanders, all he said was Palestinians are human beings. Statement. Oh my God, what did he say about the Palestinians? So that feeds into this. It's very insidious. So people can claim they don't know, and other people can know, but they're afraid. So you see things like there's a congressman in New York. His name is Richie Torres. His district is part of the Bronx, and he is he's black and Latino. And he has become the representative, the most gung-ho Zionist in Congress. He was first a city council member. They redrew his district to make sure he got a bigger chunk of Zionist votes. And he's like the most reliable guy. And he's also gay. So it's like, aha, so that is used.
No, oh my God, he's a Democrat's dream.
Black, Latino, and gay. My God, how many more box and
if he was disabled, that would be it.
Yeah, I know.
Don't say that too loud. Next thing you know, you may show up somewhere.
Yeah, somebody be coming after us for making such a statement.
No, I'm just, they love their identity.
Obviously, he has become the poster child for Zionist politics in New York City, and it's quite terrible. But people will unfortunately go along, and even people who are somewhat progressive, who can be reliably, accurately described that way, they will not cross this line. They will not touch it, and all of that, which is very sad, and it just marginalizes people so badly, marginalizes very reasonable ideas, marginalizes. In May of 21, when Black Lives Matter made their statement, there were huge pro-Palestinian marches, and they just ignored them, like the Times did with Amnesty International. They just ignored them.
Yeah. Well, that's the best way to do it. That's the smartest
Sure.
thing you can do, is pretend it's not happening. And then most people just sit there and they'll turn on CNN or read the Times, and that's their news. That's how they know what's going on in the world.
What I did find very interesting was when Jen released her statement in response to Wasserman Schultz pulling her, her kneecap attempt on Katie Halper and Rashida Tlaib and all of them, that Jen was very forceful in her rebuttal. And the next thing you know, when I had a message her the other day, I'm like, you know who's following you on Twitter now? Who? Richie Torres.
Of course. Follow you. Yeah, I love these people who follow you with evil intent. They want to make sure they can find some statement that they can attack. But when I do notice that, I block them. I'm like, no, I'm not going to make your life easier. So
I just own it. And the reality is that I feel like if I put everything out there, then anything anybody else is going to say about me is old news.
Well,
it's not going to be anything that's that interesting. It just isn't.
No, and you do have to have sort of a Trump-like FU attitude, which is, you got to be Teflon. You just got to say, look, especially with somebody like Jen, intentions that are good, and the only people who are trying to knock you off are people that have bad intentions, because, again, it goes against their corporate narrative. Richie Torres, if he's not already getting paid a lot of money for speeches, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. It's a career. It is lucrative. It is beneficial for today and for many years to come. Even somebody as pathetic and as incompetent, yes, that's what she is, our congressional representative, it has been extremely lucrative for Debbie to do what she does. That's why she blatantly does insider trading and doesn't care who knows it. It's like, I am the system. I run the system.
Sure. And it's, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's, Zionism in American politics is just one of the many forms of corruption. So it's not as though everything else is fine and there's this one bad thing. So you have this bipartisan effort when it comes to imperialism in general. So, for example, Israel really hit the jackpot when Trump was elected. So he did, it was like off the charts pro-Israel stuff. So moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. But then Biden gets in. Does he change anything that Trump did?
Not.
No.
They just don't like the way that Trump sells it.
Exactly. So, all of these, Biden's foreign policy is mostly Trump foreign policy, except worse, actually.
Listen, Margaret, I am with you 1,000%. When someone would ask me, where is Biden worse than Trump, without question, on foreign policy.
So we have a question from, I think it's Farmware. To what extent, Margaret, do you think the electorate is at fault for not being better informed?
On the one hand, I think people should read blackagendareport.com. You should be better informed. But it's hard. I don't want to blame most people. It's, we're told that there are these acceptable news sites. So if you read the New York Times, you're going to, they're basically a mouth. It's sad to see the way they've declined. They're just a big mouthpiece for Biden now on any number of issues. You can tell they call the White House before they write about any subject.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the networks or CNN or the other major newspapers. The state of journalism has declined in general. Which shrunk the number of outlets in the country. There are just fewer papers, fewer radio stations, fewer jobs in media. So that shrinks the narrative, and that diminishes so many things. So I don't want to blame people. I want to encourage people to think for themselves, to look for all the alternatives. You know, it's interesting the way people use communication. It's like if you're going to be on Twitter, at least look for people who are saying something different. You know, don't just talk about some dumb celebrity
No,
or
I
other.
want to have I want to have a needle and a Ukraine flag and resistance. And again, it's like they don't understand that you're no different than MAGA. You are You are legitimately in a cult. You can't think for yourself.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's funny when, especially now they're bringing up January 6th again. And you can tell election day is approaching, but the way
You're totally bringing me up for a very good reason, and I'm going to explain it to you, Marjorie. I'm going to tell you why.
Her name's Margaret.
No, her name's Marjorie because that's what I call it.
Because you like the space laser.
No,
Marjorie.
believe me when I tell you, they totally bring up my name, and this is why. Because I am really great for ratings. I'm really great for the Democrats. They totally deny it, but they understand that we're going to make America great again. And we're coming back in 24. And why are we coming back? Because they're losing. Their ratings are terrible. They can't get anyone to watch, but they watch me. They know I'm great. That's why they talk about January 6th. And after the midterms, after the red wave, it'll be a beautiful big red wave. We're totally going to take over. And then they're going to be talking about Trump 24/7. That Ron DeSantis, he has no chance.
Oh, yeah, that's what I think.
No Nina Turner, no Marianne Williamson, none of these idiots. They totally don't get it. It's Trump now. It's Trump tomorrow. It's Trump forever.
Go.
Make America great again.
Again.
Terrible.
I I was looking forward to that actually, but I love it. I do love it.
The truth is, if we're being completely honest, the reason they don't stop talking about him is because they secretly want him back because he's the biggest cash cow of this generation. There's nothing.
He keeps them from doing anything. He distracts people. So all you have to do is say the word Trump. I see people, they're ready to critique Biden about something or ask a question or why can't we have fill in the blank, and just somebody says the word Trump and that's it. So of course they've resurrected him now, and but being who he is, this stupid thing with trying to hold on to these documents, it's the dumbest thing ever. I think it's just Trump's personality, frankly. I think there's less to it than meets the eye, actually. So Jerusalem, he can do anything that Israel wants, and it's covered up. But to answer that question about the media, it's by design. People aren't uninformed just because the thing that's worse to me is that people try to be informed. But then if you pick up the usual paper or turn on the television news, you don't know anything you need to know. So I think there is an effort, but sadly, it's thwarted by this collusion among the media, among both parties. And so you end up with uninformed. And who said that? If you don't read the paper, you're uninformed. If you do, you're misinformed. I can't remember.
Misinformed is the bigger issue. Like, there's definitely people that are uninformed, but a lot of people that are uninformed will tell you they're uninformed, and they're okay being uninformed. I've met those people.
Yeah.
Those people are not as dangerous as the people that are misinformed, because the people that are misinformed think they're informed and are making decisions accordingly. That's the real.
I read the New York Times.
Right. I watch CNN.
They speak the truth.
Yeah.
I watch and listen to NPR, and that's the blue MAGA that they want to sneer and look down at people wearing a MAGA hat, but it's like you're just as deluded. You're just deluded by a different group of people.
Margaret, I think the best place to wind down this very informative conversation of the day. I don't want to hold on to this until Monday night. I think it has to be talked about now.
What are we?
The complete fawning over Nancy Pelosi over the past 48 hours has
Who
been
would
so
do that?
disgusting.
What happened? This is why I don't watch the news.
They have been, this is the woman who is going to give the GOP potentially a red wave in the midterms.
What did she
Because
do?
they will not. She is the reason why the insider trading bill doesn't get brought to the floor. And yet they're talking about this woman every single effing blue checkmark, neoliberal hypocrite who's within the Beltway. Nancy Pelosi is a national hero.
Yeah.
Do you know what she did?
Why was her in the Capitol on January 6th? What did she follow her mother around all the time, or what? I don't understand.
And the entire time, the only thing that I can think of is, and I wanted Jen to put out a tweet that basically said, if I say that Nancy Pelosi is a national hero, how much am I going to get paid for it? It's like, it's so transparent.
It wouldn't
obvious.
matter. It wouldn't matter.
And it won't. And I have to tell you what's even worse. If the Democrats lose control of the House in November, it will not matter to those people. None of them will say what happened. None of them will say our leadership sucks. They won't say anything.
No,
So
they don't
still
mind,
be a hero.
They don't mind losers. The Republican Party doesn't take losers. They
No.
actually get rid of losers and bring in people that can win. Democrats will celebrate their losers. And not only that, then they'll hire them to run other people's campaigns.
How about that?
Henceforth, and again, we're going to get into this much more with Jordan Chariton on Monday night, but there's a reason why, out of all the people running for office right now, John Fetterman is the cream of the crop, specifically because of what just came out today. Josh Farrow actually released information that Fetterman was willing to make public. The Democrat, is it the Occupy Democrats or Democratic Coalition, whichever one that Scott Dworkin runs, and we've got that guy Grant Stern down here in Miami who was basically troll watching Jen when she was running for Congress.
I like trolls.
They are a grifting organization. It turns out that they have raised millions of dollars and about 80% of it goes to pay their consultants. What a shock. Who couldn't have seen that coming with the Democratic loser party? And as it turns out, Fetterman decided to say, you can go F yourselves, because they've wanted his business. They want to get paid by the Fetterman campaign, and he told them to kick rocks. And so as far as I'm concerned, and maybe I'm being a little conspiratorial here, the reason why I think Dr. Oz has closed the gap on Fetterman is because once he told the Democratic consultant class to kick rocks, they decided, okay, now we're going to work on behalf of Oz, and we're going to do it behind the scenes.
They're very principled that way.
Oh, absolutely.
And can we talk about the so-called down ballot? Also part of the grid. They do not care about these local races. Democrats have lost hundreds of seats over the years, and there is absolutely no effort at the top to get them back.
We
And
talk
that-
about that a lot.
Oh my God, it makes me crazy.
Yeah, well, and we tend to focus very much so on our local races and especially on nonpartisan races. And what we find, which is so ridiculous, is that even in our nonpartisan races, the people down here still want to play partisan politics. Like they cannot get out of their own way. And it's like, I tend to like those races more because there's no nonsense in terms of tribal crap. And yet the tribes still try to make it tribal.
Yeah, we know people that are in it that, we like, but they're thinking that, well, if I just kiss the ring a little bit harder, maybe they'll like me. Like, no, if you're not a corporate sellout, then
they're not going to like you.
There is an understanding about how this is done, and they know right away whether you're on their team or not. And so you got to work around it. What Jen has working in her favor is that she has become somewhat of a known commodity politically. Debbie is the most atrocious of representatives this country has. Florida is becoming a completely out of sight, out of mind red state. And a lot of it, and in terms of DeSantis' ascent, not just to re-election, which he's, with all due respect, guys, he's going to be re-elected.
Okay.
He's heading for the presidency right now.
Yep.
And one of the biggest reasons that's happening is because of the ineptitude of the Florida Democratic Party.
They're allowing it and have every step of the way. They have no resistance. They never have. And well, the truth is you've got, just like Democrats would prefer Trump to Bernie, it's the same mentality. They don't hate DeSantis, not the Democrats at the top. They don't care one way or the other. They get to do their insider trading. It doesn't matter who's where.
This is exactly why they have a heart attack over the word socialism. You know, Bill Maher, to his credit, did a fairly decent job of explaining the support of Herschel Walker in Georgia, but he had to throw the word socialism in there.
Why?
As if to say that that's the reason. No, the most successful countries on earth have a hybrid system of capitalism and socialism. So if you think that you can just arbitrarily dismiss that word, it's, you know, again, you can't. They, as you like to say,
I just asked them to define what they mean by socialism. Most people don't have any idea.
Exactly. And a lot of people called socialists aren't. It's like the you know, people think of AOC as a socialist or Bernie as a socialist. The liberal Democrats of decades ago are outflank them to the left. I cannot tell you by how much. I can't believe that these milquetoast people get to be called socialists. And I've often said of AOC, for example, I wish she had actually done something to earn the scorn she gets from the right. She hasn't done anything. So it's like, what do you hate her for? She doesn't do anything except pose in another fashion photo shoot. She should have, you know, she needs to just do something else for a living. But she would not have as good a grift anywhere else.
No, I've been called Communist Karen. So like I've got Communist Karen, but you know what? So yeah, it's great. And actually, what's great is in theory, and that's why I always say the theoretical left and right, because I try to, for the people like you who understand, when you talk to people here, they think Democrats are the left, and I'm like, no, that's not the left. There is a left, but that's not it. And so it's funny to me because I actually, in theory, wouldn't be the worst communist. I love the idea of a uniform. I really do. I think we should have 3 cars, like small, medium, and large. I am totally good with everybody just living within, you know, their small little communities and everybody, but the real sense of commune, like I could actually kind of get with that a little bit.
Community.
Yes, actually, ironically, in Israel is where there is, you have kibbutzes, which are very truly run like that, which is ironic.
Listen, and speaking of Israel again, they have a national health care program. Our taxes go to pay for their health care, which we don't get.
Yeah,
and a living wage and everything. I have a friend having surgery on Monday who had to pay half the bill already in order to be admitted to the hospital. I mean, we all know the horror story.
Yeah. No.
But they don't have that in Israel.
No, but again, it speaks to, and again, and I think this brings the conversation full circle. It speaks to the issues that so many people have with the Israeli government, so many of the issues that people have regarding Russia and Ukraine, and so many of the issues regarding China and Taiwan. We do not, it's like you want us to focus on the GOP, and yet our house is literally on fire.
Right.
Like you're not willing to deal with the fact that you have to clean your own house first before you worry about what's going on elsewhere. That's the biggest misnomer that I still don't understand how people think they're going to continue to hoodwink millions and millions of people if eventually they're starting to figure this out. And that's why they had to censor Katie Halper, because at this point, that's where we are. They have to shut you up because enough people are starting to hear it and think, you know, that actually does make a lot of sense.
If we had a real free press that people think we have, and all the information that we discussed was something that was known to most people, we'd have a completely different policy towards Israel. Completely different.
Yeah.
So it's the intimidation works. They do it on purpose. They know that they have to, because if they didn't do it, people would demand something much better.
How can people find you?
The Black Agenda Report.
Yes. What are you working on? Anything in particular you want to mention before you go?
People should take this opportunity, buy my book, I don't know if it's blurred. Prejudential. There we go.
I don't have it with me, but I have actually. I audiobooked it. And guys, if you do audiobook it, it's Margaret. She does.
It's me. So buy my book, blackagendareport.com. We have new issue every Wednesday. I'm on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog.
Something like that. It's prejudential, but it's it's Black Americans and the presidents.
Right. Prejudential.
Right. Oh, I know that was like that was like my bubble burst, you know, not that I really thought any of them were great, but you know, I was holding out hope for Carter, and that was that. And
Jimmy Carter is the reason we got Ronald Reagan.
But you know what I want to like to say, summarizing, like for me, this whole deconstructing Zionism thing, people don't understand how hard that is. It's not from a place of hate, it's from a place of love. Like I love Israel. Like I've been there. I have family there. It's so beautiful. It's so spiritual. Like this doesn't come from a place of hate. It comes from a place of love, but recognizing that we need to love everybody that's there. And it's very, very hard. Like this has not been easy for me, for a lot of people to like hear. It's very inconvenient. And I try to equate it. Like, it's not just finding out that Santa Claus isn't real, people. This is finding out that Santa Claus is a mass murderer. Like, I don't think people really understand what that's like for someone raised as a Zionist to hear it. But that's basically what it is. It's very unsettling. And thank you so much for coming on, because you made it better.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great fun.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks, Margaret.
Always. Bye-bye.
Bye, though.
Overall, fairly successful.
I would say so.
Overall, fairly successful. I would like to keep, I think I'm going to keep this going and like just periodically have people on. And when we bring someone on to talk about this issue, I'm just going to kind of keep going back to it. I think it needs to keep being harped on.
How about Margaret saying, "Oh, I was hoping you'd do your Trump"?
Oh, you live for that shit, man. You live for that.
It's always funny. It's all in good fun.
Whatever. So guys, thank you so much for watching and supporting. We've had a lot of good support tonight, and I appreciate it. And I'll be thinking of that when I'm getting skewered over the coming weeks, because this is not going to necessarily be pretty. Like, I'll be getting phone calls.
Yeah, we'll be talking, but as you guys know, back to the regular time. We'll be at 7:30 on Monday night.
We will
have Wayne Clark, who is running for Plantation City Council.
And I voted for him.
And we are looking forward to that conversation. He was very good to us when Jen ran. And of course, he was running against Greg Toney for the sheriff position of Broward County.
Wayne Clark was a candidate for sheriff in
Definitely
Broward,
would have made a better one. And of course, right now, not a surprise, Sheriff Toney is also under investigation.
He was under investigation from the beginning.
Sure.
Like, apparently in Broward, that's a real selling point. So for anybody under any sort of like FBI investigation, come here and run for office.
Listen, I have lots of issues with our forever government, or forever shadow government, if you will. But the one thing I will say about the FBI, to their credit, they don't get involved in cases unless they really got goods. They close about 95% of their cases.
Oh, it's more than that.
So when the FBI literally is investigating you, you've done something wrong.
Right. By the time we know of an investigation, it's done.
So when people constantly say, when is the FBI going to get? When is the FBI going to get involved? Well, let me tell you, when the FBI does get involved, you better run.
Game over.
That's all I can say. So unfortunately, that was where Wayne was running for the, and I will tell you, the biggest argument against voting for Wayne, even though this is a nonpartisan race, is that Wayne is not a Democrat, so we can't vote for him.
Even though it's a nonpartisan race.
Correct. So that's the mindset. And so voting for Greg Toney, who actually was nominated, or was
he was appointed
by Governor DeSantis. Man, DeSantis really just owns the whole show.
And specifically South Florida very well.
I mean, let me tell you, this is when DeSantis wins, and he will win.
Right. It's not
the latest poll that came out from it wasn't the Siena College poll, but it was another poll. The most recent one that came out within the last week has DeSantis at plus 11. Not only you're not closing the gap, but you really have to wonder just how bad of a loss this is going to be.
It's going to hurt Peter.
So
that's going to hurt Peter.
Anyway.
Just saying. Because why? Because you know why. You want to forget that happened, because you don't want that to happen.
Nothing.
All right. Because he and I have it over. I think DeSantis is going to beat Chris by more than 10.
I said it was 7 to 10.
He said it, but he thinks it's under 10. I think it's going to be more than 10.
Siena College, which is considered one of probably the 5 most accurate polls in the United States in terms of their accuracy. They have like an A or A plus rating. They have DeSantis at a plus 8. So they literally have it right in the sweet spot of where I predicted this race was going to be.
I like the one that said plus 11.
All right.
And by the way, the night is young. And let me tell you, the DeSantis ads that are running nonstop are really good.
Yeah.
Shout out to whoever's doing his ads, because especially the one with Casey DeSantis.
You can't beat that.
You can't beat that. And then you've got Chris that writes his own smear ads because he says shit like, thank God for Joe Biden.
Yeah, you can't. Well, again, it's like if you're going to have, you have to read the tea leaves. And this is part of the reason, and maybe I'm wrong here, but one of the reasons why Charlie is probably not only going to lose, but is going to lose by a wide margin. Tim Ryan, who no one thought was going to be, literally within striking distance of J.D. Vance in the Ohio Senate race, but apparently is in a dead heat. And one of the things that Tim Ryan has made very clear is that he doesn't want Joe Biden anywhere near his campaign in Ohio. He has kept it that way. He doesn't think that, he has said publicly, I don't think Joe should run for another term. He doesn't want Pelosi or any of them coming to Ohio.
Good for him.
But as a result of him speaking his mind, the Democratic establishment has basically not been giving him funds to compete with Joe
Okay,
Vance.
however, so that'll be a wash then, because he'll also have the benefit of not having them involved, because I think he's going to lose. I really thought that this was Vance's to lose, like from.
I did as well, but
Way
Tim Ryan, to his credit, if you do happen to watch Kyle's breakdown video, Kyle Kalinske, Secular Talk, he does do a very good job of breaking down in about 15 minutes exactly what went down in their debate. And I have to say, with the exception of a couple of points where I thought Tim Ryan was completely off, he really nailed J.D. Vance to the wall. Like, he really did a great job. He was like, we got the receipts. You ain't talking your way out of this. And he was forceful. He took the fight to him and he said, hey, we got to, and again.
I just don't see it for him. I'm not feeling it for him.
Maybe not. But he did fight on the playing field of, I am not just going to play the vote blue no matter who card. I'm going to stand up for these principles. And again, corporate money indeed is behind Tim Ryan, but Tim Ryan is very much a labor guy. So got to give him that, if nothing else. Not going to hear him touting Medicare for all, living wage, or any of that.
He's
but
pretty
he's
milquetoast.
definitely pretty aggressive.
The fact that we have to be celebratory that a Democrat supports labor is how far we have fallen.
We have
that's
fallen
kind of
pretty
ridiculous.
far.
Like, that should just be the given. And yet we're here like, oh, but he supports labor. Yeah, because they're supposed to. They're supposed to be the Labor Party. Oh, it's just ironic.
Yeah, that was a great one, Left is Best. He did do a good job. So, as you guys know, and we didn't want to do it at the beginning, but we do it here at the end. If you are so inclined, patreon.com/generational change. Firmware has been an amazing supporter on the show today.
Thank you so much.
We always appreciate the super chats, but of course, monthly supporter of the show is always welcome. For as little as $5 a month, you can become a supporter, and that is at patreon.com/generational change. But if you're feeling a little bit generous.
And you guys, I'm serious. This will be like one of those things that I'm telling you, like in 100 years, this will be worth so much money, and only very few people will understand
For
the inside
$10
joke.
a month, you can have a Mansion Parliamentarian bumper sticker.
That is key, because I
Very
think
key.
it is key. I think we should vote for the people with the most power.
I
That just
would
makes
agree.
sense. And you also will get the Lulu sticker, and $25 a month gets you Generational Change jersey.
It's a good one.
They're really cute.
Yeah.
I get compliments actually on this shirt, and people don't even realize that it's like affiliated with anything. It's really cute. On the back, it does say Generational Change, but it's not obnoxious.
But if you do not feel like giving up your personal information for months on end, and we all know a lot of people don't want to do that, then feel free to go to Cash App. $Gen Change. You can make a contribution right now, and that will be very appreciated. We certainly hope that you guys found this forum. Call it a forum?
It's a forum, really. And again, I got to just continue this. This can't be something that's a one-time event. It has to be something that we're constantly talking about, because I feel like this is now somewhat of a mission for me, because it is very important for Jewish people, specifically Jewish people, to speak out about this. And I feel like now it is part of my mission to disassociate Judaism from Zionism and just really make it clear that they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
They're just not the same thing. There are many, many Jews that are not Zionists, and there are many Zionists that aren't Jews.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, those Zionists, they actually don't give a crap about the Jews. They just need them all there for the rapture and whatnot. But so it's a very important topic. And I like everything else, I feel like it has to be dealt with reason. And we can't just start calling names and acting like a child throwing mud in a playground. Like, our congresswoman acts like a child. Well, that's just horrible. That's anti-Semitic. No, actually, it's a very valid criticism. And maybe if you were actually a real representative of people, you would want to have those kinds of dialogues, and you would want to come to conclusions that were based on reason.
No, that would require her not to be a corporate sellout, but that's just not possible.
And so, guys, I am begging you, I am begging you to just encourage reason. Encourage use of reason. It's very and I will admit when I'm being unreasonable, but when I'm being unreasonable, it's just me, how I feel about something, but I wouldn't say we should dictate policy on it. Like, that's the thing. We can feel how we feel, and it doesn't always have to be reasonable. I personally won't drive German car. I just won't. I know it's unreasonable. I know that those companies, I know Ford has anti-Semitic background. I know it's completely unreasonable. But yet I just don't want to, because it just wouldn't feel good to me. I just wouldn't like it. So I just don't. I don't need to be reasonable because it's personal preference. But when we're talking about like Palestinians and Israel, let's be reasonable. Please. And stop being so fear-based and fear-mongering and name-calling. It's like, it's just, we're not going to get anywhere.
Fear keeps people in line.
Well, that's true.
And with that said,
I'm not scared of you anymore.
No.
I'm not. I've been scared of you for a very long time. By the way, shout out to Ihsan Lecky. And if she ever by any chance comes across this, although I think I could probably reach out to her somehow.
Sure.
I need to, this is something that even as far, I don't know if I ever told you that I had a conversation with her about this in 2019. And I was still in that mental gymnastics of saying we need a two-state solution mindset. And she was basically telling me then, that's not really going to work. And I was all, but then what would happen? And and all just very defensive and very knee jerk. And I very much see the error of that. So anyway, Ihsan was very much like, now that I look back on it, exceptionally patient with me. I would have throttled me maybe.
So on Monday night, we will have Jordan Chariton of Status Quo News, who is going to, again, like Margaret Kimberly, friend of the show, Katie Halper and Rania Khalek are friends of the show. So we have a nice group of
We have nice
supporters.
friends.
And so Jordan is going to come on to talk about the recent attempt, which hasn't been finalized yet, but the recent attempt by another Amazon labor union in Albany, New York this time.
No, another effort by them to crush the one that already exists.
Bezos is pulling out all the stops to try to prevent this from happening. So Jordan is going to come on to talk about it, saying they're basically using the same intimidation tactics they used in Staten Island as well as Bessemer, Alabama. So they're not letting up. And of course, because we don't have labor laws in the United States, he's able to get away with this. Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, if we had a real all-time president right now, like a Teddy Roosevelt, Amazon would have been broken up a long time ago.
Yeah, and he'd still be massacring natives. I'm just saying, it's like, be careful what you wish for.
Oh, again, no one's perfect.
No, okay. Well, that's like the people that say, Israel's a democracy. They have healthcare. There's Palestinians participate in the government. Oh, yes, they keep a whole bunch of people, like 2 million people in outdoor prison. Bygones. You could do good. That doesn't undo your bad.
No, there's good and bad. So last but not least, our small business neighbor, who I'm going to have to call because I need new car insurance.
There you go.
Apex Insurance Agency, home, auto, and life insurance. You definitely want to give them a call because here in Florida, especially, supporting small business goes a lot further than supporting big business. If
Always.
your rates are not good, you definitely want to call a local supplier who will probably give you a much better rate.
They'll look out for you.
And they are much more of a good neighbor.
And they'll call you when something's a better deal. We actually had that. Now like I said, this is new to us, and I've had my people because I have a small business relationship with our people. But it's like they'll literally call and be like, "Hey, we saw this might be a better deal for you."
Yeah.
You get that with small business. So guys, if you are in the need for home, auto, or life, check out Apex. Because why not?
I'm going to give them a call. Maybe you will too.
That's we're getting corporate bought. We're being taken over.
There's a great Simpsons episode with
Oh my
Krusty the Clown with
God.
Canyonero. If you haven't seen that one, he becomes a corporate sellout.
Now you're talking about two things I don't care about: The Simpsons or clowns.
Yeah, Krusty the Clown.
Clowns
I
are
don't know.
gross.
Are you still afraid of clowns?
I'm not afraid of them. I just don't particularly care for them.
With that said, we are very appreciative.
And
of
then
all
what
of
do
you
we
here
have on
today.
Wednesday?
Wednesday, we are having a very well known in the YouTube content creating world, Roberto Blake. He is going to be coming on, sharing his thoughts about potentially how we can grow our channel really big and strong. You know.
But I mean, I would think we would also talk about things like censorship and the YouTube algorithm and how to get around all of that stuff.
Maybe he knows all the secrets.
Because the struggle is real, people. The struggle is real.
It's very real.
So support our little channel. I try to do really good, thought-provoking things. We definitely need to have the rabbi back on because there's no way I took all these notes for nothing.
No, you'll have them back.
All right. Because like I even have color-coded notes.
We're also going to have Jamal Thomas on, which will probably be in about a week.
Jamal Thomas, I think, works exceptionally hard.
He does.
And yeah.
You got the email, right?
I did. Okay. And basically he had texted us like 10 minutes before he was supposed to come on saying, hey guys, I'll be there in a minute, whatever. And then he never came on. And we're like, that's so weird. And now we know that he fell asleep. He fell asleep.
Yeah.
Because he was probably, he's probably been up for however long, do whatever. It's just, that does not even, and then when I saw that, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Hopefully we will have our good friend Mike Figueredo come back sometime soon. We are looking to have Kim Iverson. I know you guys have.
You know what? I don't get the Kim Iverson hate. I really don't.
You'll see.
I don't see. I like Kim.
She had a little tiff with him.
I like Kim.
Kim. Yes. Kim had a little tiff with our friend Mike Figueredo recently. Maybe we can have them both on.
That would be really cool.
That would be impressive if we can pull that off.
I might be able to do that.
Why not?
Well,
that would be a show.
Well, the truth is, I really like them.
I do,
and I think that ultimately that we're on the same mission.
We're trying to be.
Yeah, and the truth is that Kim does tend to be very libertarian. That's her prerogative. Like she's allowed to be that way. She's a nice person. She's a good person. Like, we don't have to agree with her and everything.
Dirtbag leftist. Here's all I'm going to say. Okay, whether you agree with the usage of ivermectin or not, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that corporate media in the Democratic side was saying that people were taking horse paste, and that's not true. So the fact that they kept perpetuating that narrative that people are injecting themselves with horse paste is a lie.
It is a lie.
And there would have been tens of thousands of dead people that we would have heard about as a result.
And by the way, Kim left Rising for the same reason Katie just did, or isn't going back.
Because she wasn't willing to be censored.
And that's integrity. And I've spoken with Kim on air, off air. I like her. I think she's very principled, and she absolutely 100% does her homework. She does her research. She spends hours doing it. She really knows when she's talking about something, she's done the work. So you might not agree with her position, but she does the work and knows the facts. And also Kim is somebody who spent a pretty good amount of time traveling in the West Bank and spending a lot of time really researching this issue on Zionism in particular, and was very clear on that for a long time already.
And we'll leave on this note. If you think you're ever getting anything like a living wage, universal health care, ending the wars, clean energy grid to save ourselves from runaway climate change, if you think you can exclude people like Kim Iverson from the conversation, good luck ever getting there.
Well, why would we want to? Well,
I'm just putting that out there. That to me is what it's all about.
Yes, you're right. You're right. She wasn't censored in the way that Katie was censored, but she was censored in a way that they wanted her message not to be on the show. So it was a matter of, she wasn't purposefully one piece being left off,
right.
But her viewpoint and her being on the show, when we know, regardless of what you think about Kim, she's extremely professional. She's extremely civil. She's very well read and she's well spoken. So to censor someone like that is just incorrect. And I do feel the same about what they did to Katie, but it's censorship. It's censoring viewpoints that you don't agree with. It's not a good plan.
Okay. And again, we'll agree to disagree. Just like you, dirtbag leftists, don't agree with abortion. Okay, that's fine. If that's what you believe, then that's fine. It's not your place to tell Jen that she is not allowed to control her body. Yeah. We live in a libertarian left society if people have all the information.
Like if people really want to see, you want to see when the Moms Demand Action women actually start picking up their weapons, it's when you start coming after our reproductive rights. Like you want to really push women to that point. I mean, it's just like people we'll kill you. Like seriously, like I'm not even being metaphorically. Like I absolutely, are you kidding me? I am so done with people talking about my bodily autonomy. I swear I'd kill people for that.
Yeah.
I'd actually kill people for opposing other people's bodily autonomy. So it's a big deal.
Last thing, and there's a reason why loyalty in politics probably means more than anything when it's about your actual principles and not loyalty to the almighty dollar or to the party line. When you are loyal to the actual growth of a movement and to the principles that matter, that's when you know you're starting to get somewhere, because there are enough people that have attempted to try to knock Jen off her perch. There's a jealousy component that is in there, but never forget that Andrew Yang had the best line. I can agree with progressives on 20 things, but if the 21st thing is wrong, then I am finished. And that is a big problem within a lot of these circles. You might agree with Kim or a number of other people.
Right. She does not purposefully spread misinformation. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
She does way too much research and is very specific about what she does.
They specifically said that the vaccine stops the spread. As it turns out, it was a lie. And I always thought it was a lie.
We always thought that. By the way,
so,
Precious Image, you should really go back. I don't remember. It was probably we're talking a couple years ago already. But if you go back and look at some of Kim's old videos, because she did a few shows, she broke it up with her trip over to Israel. And she did a really good job. I mean, that was one of the early on things when I'm like, okay, she's got it going on. So you might not like her opinion. Yeah. But she does not purposefully spread misinformation. She's extremely well read and smart. And you just don't like what she's saying. Yeah. That's just not
And
okay.
in this world, we're going to have to accept the fact that Kim agrees with a lot of the policies that we're fighting for.
Absolutely.
That is when you have to realize that, again, Kim Iverson may be friendly with the likes of, let's say, even a Ben Shapiro or a Steven Crowder. We're not trying to get people like that, because people like that have their agenda, which has nothing to do with working class economics.
So
or
why does that make us
benefit.
kick her out on when we agree with her on 9 out of 10 things? Here, look, Kim Iverson believes in the class war and she's on our side.
Tim Pool is the same thing.
Like, you guys are not understanding that you can find allies in places when you stop looking at every little thing that somebody says and you find people that are in your class solidarity. That's what this is.
The second people started saying that people were injecting themselves with horse paste, at that point, I said, well, that's not an ally. That is not an ally. That is an enemy, because those people may not say that they're against universal health care and a living wage, but they'll find every excuse to say it's not possible. And that is where we have to get serious about whether or not we're really trying to get where we're trying to get. You have to put your feelings aside and recognize that this is a fight much bigger than our own, individual desires. There is something that can really, again, we can get where we want to go, but we have to recognize that these conversations like we had today is necessary, and having relationships with people that we don't always agree with are necessary, because there's no other way.
I actually kind of just like them. Why can't I just like them? Tim Pool was nice. He was a nice guy to hang out with. His group was fun. They're nice. I don't have to agree with him. I don't have to know what his motives or intentions are. He's a content creator on YouTube.
Paul,
it's like people. Just people.
And Paul, you bring up a really great point, and that is why, and I think I really want to eat too.
I haven't eaten all day. I'm like on adrenaline.
And here's the bottom line about the podcast content creator who will not be named.
Please don't.
That particular person has no interest in actually fixing the problem. They may like to point out problems, and they're correct about them, but to actually take action and do what is necessary to fix Sans problems, they're not going to do it, because it's not financially beneficial to them to do it.
That's a lot of people, by the way.
Absolutely. But that one particular person who people still think is really fighting on their behalf, he's not at all.
I don't even see any of that stuff anymore. I have a whole different feed now. It's so interesting. I have all different people. Like, I watch Reset Race, I watch Black Agenda Report, I watch Breakthrough News, I watch Mike Figueredo.
And Dirtbag Leftist, that is where you and I, and probably Jen too, disagree.
No, because Kim is really, she does journalist work. She actually does journalist work. He doesn't. So it's not right. Like that, you're really apples and oranges. Like if he ever traveled over to like Gaza and did like a 2-week expose or whatever, like Max Blumenthal did, or travel through the West Bank and do all that like Kim, or actually spend hours and hours a day doing research on these topics, then maybe. But I just don't think he's doing it.
For those of you who haven't seen it, and I will always remind people who always want to know, check out the video of what we did about 1.5 years ago, which explained exactly what that podcaster did when he came down here to Florida and had an opportunity to, it was about 2 years ago, to give Jen a boost and decided, no, I'm not doing that. Not worth it.
That's not somebody who's trying to help the solution.
Not
like, you know what I mean? Like that's not somebody who's on a mission. That's somebody who's on a mission for themselves.
Yeah.
And you know
just
what?
like
a lot of people are like that.
Just like Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is not on a mission to solve the problems of the United States, first and foremost. She is on a mission to get as much money out of this as she possibly can. That is a fact. Look at how she did what she did, and look at who she is currently supporting in politics. It is, again, if you can figure out a way to make the money, I guess good for you.
I guess for me,
You're not on a mission.
Why are you in this? And what are you about as a person? And are you really trying to help people? Are you really trying to, like, what are you really doing? Right? Which is what I say is your mission.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really noticed for some people. And it is for me in particular. Like my content creator list has changed significantly. Like I still have Bo, because God, what would I do without that? And you know, it's getting smaller and smaller because more and more people are just using their soapbox for like their little vanity projects, and they're not helping.
We got to get serious, people.
They're not helping.
Time to get serious.
It's like if all you're doing, like we spend a lot of time criticizing Democrats and pointing out the problems. We spend we spend plenty of time doing that, but we spend most of our time talking with people about solutions to the problems. We spend most of our time talking with authors or experts or historians or people where we're trying to really help people come to solutions, right? Like that's what we're really trying to do. And so, yeah, we point out problems, but we're offering solutions. And I think that's a big distinction. And a lot of those people they're not trying to get to solutions. They just want to fucking bitch.
And on that note, Jordan is going to have probably a rant, if you will, on Monday about that. Because it appears that we're one of the only people who is asked to have him on regarding what's going on with the Amazon.
We always are. He and you both say this like this is somehow a new phenomenon.
No, it's not. It just goes to show you who gives a damn about what matters and who doesn't, because this is what matters. What's happening to the Amazon workers in Albany is a reflection of Bezos doing everything in his power to stop a unionized movement for Amazon throughout the United States. You think that's bad? You wait until the Waltons sink their teeth into Walmart workers who are going to eventually attempt to do the same thing. It'll be even worse.
I just had a really interesting sort of like analogy or metaphor in my head. So it's like labor, they're the bees, right? They're the bees, and those guys don't want to deal with the bees. But the problem is, we die without the bees. We need the bees. So if you want to get rid of the bees so that you don't get stung, we can't live. So you got to live with the bees.
That's why we dig you, Steve, and we appreciate all that you do. And hopefully everybody recognizes.
Absolutely.
You got to ask yourself, Jen brought up a great point, and let's leave on that note. Why are you in this? What is your motivation? Because if your motivation is just to, again, not talking about any particular channel, but ones that just constantly want to talk about other content creators and other fighting that's going on constantly. No,
they're part of the drama.
Again, that's not getting us where we need to go.
No.
If you want to help us get us where we need to go, then recognize that there's got to be a reason why you're here. Figure that out. We'll see you Monday.
Bye, all.